We'll call the meeting to order, and I think, as everyone knows, they've heard this speech many times. We're dealing with the Budget Implementation Act, and order there, guys. First of all, I understand there is officials here for every division, and I do apologize for. I know that a good many people would have had plans tonight. And we really appreciate you coming to appear before a committee and breaking whatever plans you may have had. So we'll start with Division 4 of Part 6, which is the securities issued or guaranteed by foreign governments. And we have Mr. Nick Moran, who is the Director, Resource Management, Financial Sector, FSP Finance, and Mr. Graham Johnson, Bank of Canada, Managing Director, Funds Management and Banking Department. So welcome, and you have a short statement, I believe, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the invitation to discuss the proposed legislative changes in Bill C-74 to the Bank of Canada Act. Under Section 18D of the Act, the Bank of Canada has the authority to buy or sell securities issued or guaranteed by the government of a country in the European Union. The Bank of Canada is proposing amendments to the Act in anticipation of the United Kingdom's exit from the European Union. These amendments would ensure that the Bank of Canada can continue to buy and sell securities that are issued or guaranteed by the United Kingdom. And that's really it. I'm happy to take questions if there are any. It's a technical amendment reflecting the Brexit vote.
That's the Government of Canada being proactive, I believe. Is there any questions? Mr. Kamish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So happy we're here this evening. It's a wonderful thing. The Exchange Fund account, how much does it have in it right now?
The size of the Exchange Fund account is about $75 billion US dollars.
75 billion. So that's securities of all the different European Union members?
No, it's the currencies that are held in it are US dollars, euros, Japanese yen, and sterling. The euro-denominated securities would include countries such as Germany, France, the Netherlands, not all European members. We have an internal credit rating assessment group. The statement of investment policy stipulates that securities must be of a minimum investment grade. It's roughly equivalent to single A minus. We have an internal credit ratings group that examines the ratings of the sovereigns, assigns a rating to them, and investment is restricted to those entities that meet the minimum credit standards.
Okay, so by technical amendment, basically this just simply makes it possible that whether it's a soft Brexit or a hard Brexit, the Government of Canada would be able to continue to purchase United Kingdom securities? The
Bank of Canada would be able to continue to purchase and sell securities issued or guaranteed by the government or by the United Kingdom, yes. Because without the amendment, the United Kingdom was not in the current legislation specifically broken out from members of the European Union.
Good.
Further questions? Mr. Polyev.
Can you list the type of securities?
List the type of securities?
Yes.
Yeah, they're all investment-grade fixed income securities, mostly issued by sovereigns, but there are some super sovereigns and agencies as well.
So basically treasury bills and government bonds?
That would be correct, yeah. The bulk of the portfolio. There would be some issued by agencies or government-guaranteed entities, but this is an extremely liquid, very high-quality portfolio.
And by extremely liquid, does that mean you're buying short terms?
No, securities can go out to 10.5 years, but given the nature of the securities we purchase, a 10.5-year U.S. Treasury or bond or OAT or U.K. gilt would be extremely liquid.
Because you can sell them
instantly.
Right.
Okay, Mr. Kamish.
Just so I can better understand the mechanism, and you had said $75 billion US, but I have a sheet here that says $86.6 billion from January 2018 is the market value.
Just a few points of clarification with respect to the figures. I think the 86 billion is the totality of
Okay.
Canada's official international reserves. Within that, there's a portion that is the assets that are within the exchange fund account. Within the exchange fund account, we have the fixed income securities that Mr. Graham spoke about, as well as special drawing rights issued by the IMF.
So 75 billion of liquid assets, so like cash from other currencies of other countries, and then the difference then $11 billion of everything you just mentioned, including special drawing rights.
As well as IMF reserve
IMF
positions.
reserves.
Yeah.
Okay. So, because the amendments, there's a subsection amendment here to the Currency Act to allow the Minister of Finance to make payments from the exchange fund account to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Is that part of it too? Like, is that just so you can flow money from this international account to the General Revenue Fund? Like, is that where it's going?
2 points here. Mr. Chair, if you'd like us to speak about the next division.
Oh, sorry, have I moved on too far?
That is division.
Why don't we do that? We'll put Division 5 on as well, which is the same witnesses, and that's the exchange fund account, and we'll deal with questions on both, Pierre. So if Nick and Graham could give their opening statement on Division 5, and then we'll question on both 4 and 5.
And you'd like for us to proceed with that now?
Yeah, please. Division 5.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The exchange fund account represents the largest component of Canada's official international reserves. In 2011, the government announced that the exchange fund account would be part of the government's prudential liquidity plan if, for instance, markets were severely disrupted or inaccessible. The proposed technical amendments in Division 5 of Part 6 would clarify this objective by stipulating that the exchange fund account may provide a source of liquidity for the Government of Canada. The amendments would also clarify that funds in the exchange fund account can be transferred to the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
Okay, then, Mr. Commish, your question was related to that, or do you want to? Okay, Mr. Dussault.
I think I'll let.
No, just in the first point, without this amendment, the Bank of Canada would not be able to buy securities from UK post-Brexit.
That's correct.
Because legislation provide the authority for any securities that you can buy on the market.
Yeah, the powers of the Bank of Canada are very specifically spelled out in the Bank of Canada Act, and we cannot deviate from those at all. Specifically, the United Kingdom was included in Euro area countries. That may well no longer meet that definition, and this is a technical amendment to address that contingency.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Commish.
So just back to my question then on that clause 224, which allows the Minister of Finance to make payments from the exchange fund account to Consolidated Revenue Fund. I'm just looking at my notes here. You're saying it's a technical amendment. So this would only apply, this is again just the UK, or is this is a broader change to modify how the money is transiting? Because the Consolidated Revenue Fund is basically, this would give the Minister of Finance access to this, to the international fund to transfer between the two accounts, or just one way?
Thank you for your question. So this is a technical amendment in the sense that the policy has been announced by the government back in 2011 and reiterated in every subsequent budget that the funds within the exchange fund account would be available for liquidity purposes if, for instance, domestic markets were severely disrupted and the government couldn't borrow on domestic markets. And so
then I have a question before you go on, because I'm going to lose the train of thought.
Okay.
So then how are the transactions reported to the public and parliamentarians too?
Right. Well, a couple different ways. So there is a statutory requirement for the minister to report on the exchange fund account on the management of Canada's official international reserves on an annual basis. It's a document that's tabled in Parliament, typically in October for the previous fiscal year. And in addition to that, Canada adheres to IMF reporting standards, which requires us to report monthly the position of the exchange fund account 5 days after the closing of the month.
So, and those are so the report, like, that's the only mechanism that exists to make it public that money has moved from this exchange fund into the consolidated revenue fund?
So under the Currency Act, there is currently a mechanism for advances to be made from the consolidated revenue fund to the exchange fund account. So that mechanism exists, and some would suggest that the concept of advancement of funds embodies a concept of being able to transfer the funds back. But from a legal clarity perspective, we wanted to make sure that it was crystal clear that authority
In the legislation.
Exactly.
So does that mean, okay, so I guess back then to one of the first questions I had. So this is a one-way, correct? Like this would be just exchange fund to consolidate revenue, and there's a public reporting mechanism that exists already, but it wouldn't happen the other way. That would be through the regular estimates budgetary process. It would have to be reported saying the government is putting money back in.
The reporting mechanism exists in terms of the positions of the exchange fund account. So that the reporting mechanism isn't being changed here, and amendments aren't being made to the requirements with respect to monthly reporting as well as annual reporting. And here it's simply to clarify that it is in fact a two-way street, that funds can move from the CRF to the EFA, but that EFA funds can also move to the CRF.
Okay.
Yeah, the Currency Act does stipulate advances from the CRF to the exchange fund account and from the exchange fund account to the consolidated revenue fund, so it does move both ways. And also the Bank of Canada, on our website, we report the size and composition of the reserves on a weekly basis. So any change in the size or the composition would be available and noticed to the public on a weekly basis.
All in, Mr. Commish, Mr. Polyev, and then Mr. Dussault.
Is the total value of the exchange currency fund considered on the balance sheet of the Government of Canada?
To report the assets on the balance sheet, but the way that the fund exists, and it's held in the name of the Minister of Finance and is reported on the balance sheet. It is managed with an asset liability framework. So for every dollar of asset, there's an equal liability. And so from a net position, it effectively neutralizes one with the other.
The market debt of the Government of Canada is about $1 trillion. The net debt that Finance Canada reports is $668 billion this year. Is this exchange fund one of the assets that explains the difference?
It's both an asset and a liability. And so to fund the assets in the EFA, the predominant mechanism to do so is to issue government debt in the domestic market and then synthetically convert it into a foreign currency funding tool through a cross-currency swap. And so from a debt issuance perspective, the portion that is issued in domestic debt would be part of those $600 and some billion.
but it zeroes itself out, right?
Yes.
Correctly, with the asset.
Yeah.
These are financial assets. Translated to Canadian dollars, it would be over $100 billion of financial assets that would be an offset to come to the net debt amount.
So it is one of the assets that explains the difference between the $1 trillion of market debt and the $669 billion of net debt.
Yes.
And you said it. So you say it's $75 billion US dollars and 100 something.
Yeah, 105 Canadian equivalent, sort of.
And when you were just explaining to my colleague that you update did you say monthly, the transactions?
On the Bank of Canada's website, we publish weekly updates, high-level updates of the size and the currency composition. Monthly, more detailed reports are published on the Department of Finance's website, and on an annual basis, there's the official report on the international reserves, which gives a much more fulsome and detailed explanation of the holdings and the activities.
Does it, obviously the value in Canadian dollars of these currencies fluctuates, so does that not affect do those fluctuations not affect the balance sheet of the government of
do an asset and liability hedge? So if we own a 10-year U.S. Treasury, for example, that is funded with a 10-year U.S. dollar obligation. So the currencies are matched. We are long U.S. dollars owning the Treasury. We are short U.S. dollars in the funding of that. So the currencies are matched. The interest rate exposure is matched. So movements in either exchange rates or interest rates have no net impact on the fiscal position of the Government of Canada.
Okay.
We do manage to earn a small positive return because happily the interest rate we pay to fund these reserves is a little bit lower than the interest rate we receive on the assets.
Because other governments are paying higher yields than we are.
Yes, sir.
At present.
Yes.
Not to stray, but do we expect that to continue?
It has been the case for some time, and I'm extremely reluctant to forecast interest rates because that's a bit of a losing game. But we are setting the portfolio up. It has maturities out to 10.5 years, and we lock the funding in. So I think we're, as portfolio managers, we're reasonably confident that we can continue to earn a small but positive return for our sort of forecast horizon, which I would say would be 2 to 3 or 4 years.
And when was the last time the Bank of Canada owned, as part of this portfolio, precious metals like gold?
Just to remind you, the portfolio is held in the name of the Minister of Finance. We do manage it, but
Right.
It is the property of the Minister of Finance, the Government of Canada. It has been a while since we've held gold. I believe, I don't know exactly, we can confirm, I believe it was 2001 that the last of the gold was sold.
And final question, does the Bank of Canada, the governor, for example, have any authority to restrain a finance minister's ability to draw on these exchange funds, or is it, as you pointed out multiple times, this is a fund in the name of the Minister of Finance? Does he have absolute discretion?
It is held in the name of the Minister of Finance, and he has discretion to use the funds.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Dussault.
Just a small question. You said it's for, it's in the law. It's for one-way street, and you want to clarify that it could be a two-way process, two-way street. So do you mean that it's already something that you do or you have done from the exchange fund to the consolidated revenue fund, or have you done it before? And it's just to clarify that in the law that you can actually do it.
We have done it before. It's sort of normal practice in very small amounts, and that is because, as I'd said, the exchange fund account earns a little bit more in interest than it pays in expenses. So over time, you build up a positive balance. We do try and manage it on a hedged basis. So, over time, as the amount of the unhedged builds up, we transfer that out into the consolidated revenue fund. And if there were times when the size of the exchange fund account needed to increase, there was a commitment to keep it at a minimum of 3% of nominal GDP. When that was increasing, it would obviously have to be funded by money from the CRF. So it does happen, and under the currency, under the legislation that's permitted, this is simply, as Mr. Marion said, a technical amendment to bring the Currency Act consistent with other legislation and policies that we have been regular practice for some time now.
So the law already provide you the authority to do it, but you're just I'm just wondering, why are we doing this amendment if it's already something that is happening?
Thank you for the question. So the law currently provides that monies can be advanced to the exchange fund account from the consolidated revenue fund. And for those who look at the legal meaning of advance, some would say that there is an inherent concept of being able to pay back those funds. So and this is where we want it to be crystal clear with respect to the authorities in the legislation, that is in fact what is possible. The law currently provides the authority for net revenues from the EFA to flow back to the CRF, and that's already very crystal clear in the Act.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Marion. Mr. Johnson, turning to Division 6, banknotes. Thank you both again. So from Finance, who's been here before, I believe, Marie-Joseph Lambert, and from the Bank of Canada, Mr. Richard Wall. So, who will give us the short overview? Mr. Wall? Sure. Ms. Lambert.
Bonsoir. Good evening. Canadians need banknotes that are in complete security, that they can use in complete safety.
Banknote denominations that are no longer issued by the Bank of Canada and hardly ever used, such as the $1,000 banknote, would have no impact on most Canadians.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the invitation to discuss the proposed legislative changes to the Bank of Canada Act and the Currency Act. These changes will allow the government to remove legal tender status from Canadian banknotes and the Bank of Canada to more effectively manage the quality of notes in circulation. Notes issued by the Bank of Canada, together with coins issued by the Royal Canadian Mint, are what is known as legal tender, which means the money approved in the country for paying debts. Removing legal tender status means that some banknotes can no longer be used for payment of debt. En gros, il sera plus difficile de faire des achats.
Generally speaking, it will be harder to use banknotes that do not have security features. The banknotes will not lose their value, however. The Bank of Canada will still continue to honor them.
Because having the power to remove legal tender status from banknotes means that we can do a better job of keeping notes that are in circulation more secure. Newer banknotes have better security features that make them difficult to counterfeit and are in better condition overall. Keeping notes current means they work more efficiently for all of us. To date, every note issued by the Bank of Canada since 1935 remains legal tender, despite the fact that the security features on those older notes are either non-existent or easily simulated. Withdrawing older notes from circulation will contribute to the public's confidence in using banknotes and the systems in place to efficiently process them. As stated in Budget 2018, if the power to remove legal tender is granted by Parliament, the government's intention is to remove this status from the $1, $2, $25, $500, and $1,000 banknote bills. Legislative changes are required to both acts because the powers for issuance of banknotes resides in the Bank of Canada Act, but the specifics of banknotes are in the Currency Act. De nombreuses banques centrales ont le pouvoir de supprimer le cours légal de leur VUBA.
Numerous central banks have the power to do so. For example, the Bank of England often removes banknotes in circulation. The new banknotes in circulation and the previous banknotes both circulate for a given time. The central bank continues to recognize the legal tender of the old banknotes. In November, it was announced that old banknotes will still have legal tender for 4 months. In Canada, some banknotes will no longer be in circulation. The $25 banknotes and the $500 banknotes, rather, from 1935 are no longer in circulation. They were removed from circulation in 1989 and in 1996, respectively. The $1,000 banknotes were removed in 2000. So these changes will not have an impact for most Canadians. They are rarely used to carry out transactions.
The bank will provide clear information to Canadians on how to redeem the affected banknotes. This will involve a period during which the notes can be redeemed through financial institutions, as Canadians can do today. After this period, the notes can be redeemed directly with the Bank of Canada. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, before I turn to Mr. Albas, for how long would they be able to be redeemed with the Bank of Canada? The reason I ask, I know there's a lot of old cattle buyers out there still of $1,000 bills. I'll never forget going to one guy to borrow money one time. He pulled me out $18,000 and on a handshake lent me the money, and they're all thousands. And he wasn't long been paid back either, not a word signed. So say it's 5 years' time. Will they still honor those $1,000 bills?
The Bank of Canada will honor the face value of these notes forever.
Okay, Mr. Albas.
So I do recognize there has to be a process, a practical one. Obviously, there will be loss due to damage and people buried in their backyards and then forget them and they get lost. So I understand that and with so much printing as being so sophisticated, there has to be a process. But are we not concerned that, for example, that we will be creating whether it be a gray or somewhat black market, where since the bank is the only vehicle that can accept them, and there will be basically people that will pay someone $500 for their $1,000 bill because they can't utilize it somewhere else. Was there any alternatives looked at? For example, you put basically a 25-year limit on it. Then it's not decided by politicians, which, by the way, Mr. Chair, I do have some concerns when it's politicians that get to choose which bills are acceptable and which ones aren't. I think that keeping it somewhat independent is important. And so was there any other proposals, like a 25-year span with a 5-year redemption, just so that it's not up to an individual government to decide suddenly which currency people can use anymore? I'm just struggling here because this is, again, I do think that we're going to be making some people, whether they be successful entrepreneurs that have, safes, personal safes where they have that, and the only way they can actually get market value for the money is to sell it at a discount.
Let me break apart the question a little bit. There is a process at the Bank of Canada that deals with mutilated notes, which is separate. So if you do find notes that are buried and you're not able to determine what the denomination they are, they can still be redeemed at the Bank of Canada. So whether or not they're buried, destroyed, sometimes destroyed in a fire, we have a service that we provide to Canadians in order to make sure they retain their value. With respect to legal tender status, we looked globally at what the best practice was internationally. And generally, it's 1, 2, a period of time after the announcement of the removal of legal tender status, where in fact you do enact that. It's the first time in Canada, so we're going to be learning, I think, as we go along in terms of what the appropriate actions need to be in terms of how we communicate to Canadians. But I think in response to your direct question about whether or not there are alternatives and whether or not there's an extended timeline that can be provided, you have to recognize that we have not issued a $1,000 note for 18 years now, since 2000. Understanding that there are still some that are out there, as I said, they'll always be redeemed at the Bank of Canada, and we have mechanisms in place today where we can accept and give credit and face value for those notes.
So what do you say about the creation of alternative markets? For example, where someone has a pawn shop, they'll say, we'll buy your old bills, and again, they will give half value for it. For many people that cannot get to the Bank of Canada personally, that might be one of their only options if no one else will accept the bills.
Well, most financial institutions now accept all series of bills, and we see them come in on our processing centers all the time. They work on a know your customer basis. So if you're a customer of the bank, and they know who you are. If you're not a customer of the bank, you can communicate directly with the Bank of Canada through the mail.
Yeah, well, Mr. Wall, I would say, and
Absolutely.
I mentioned this earlier today, and this is no question on not believing you. The problem is when people buy traveler's checks, and I've met a constituent who had purchased them, tried to use them in the United States, which she had used, and people would not accept them in the United States. She brought them back to her financial institution, and they said, sorry, we don't accept them anymore because of some security changes. So, again, that's something that she actually paid a premium for, and now can't have that money returned by her own financial institution where they know that client. She's banked there for well over 20 years. So, excuse me, again, because I do see these cases quite frequently. So the system doesn't always work that way, and I'm afraid that we're going to see where some people with an older note will end up going to a secondary purchaser who will then, at a profit, bring it in to the Bank of Canada.
Well, I do think that the situation you discussed does happen today. Older notes are brought into banks. They can actually identify or authenticate the note because it is so old. There's a collection process that they undertake where they send it to the Bank of Canada. We authenticate the note and then provide value to the bank, and then they provide value to their customer.
Okay, that's on the record. Mr. Dezeau.
Juste pour bien comprendre, est-ce que les...
I want to make sure I understand properly. Will the changes to the law prevent a situation arises such as we saw previously, the removal of coins, the 1-cent coins, the pennies as we call them? Does this bill mean that the government will no longer need to introduce a bill specifically to remove money from circulation, coins from circulation, such as was the case with the penny? Is that the purpose of the law? The bill, rather?
Will provide the government with the power to declare certain denominations, certain banknotes non-legal tender only. It does not demonetize them in any way. They remain legal tender and they're redeemable for their face value.
OK. Contrairement aux sous-noirs qui présentement...
Unlike pennies. Well, pennies still have the same value. We continue to credit the value of pennies that come to us. So it is possible to do so with the current legislation. Money can be removed from circulation.
The power to remove from circulation only exists for coinage, which is why it's not parallel for banknotes, which is why we're looking to have it put in for banknotes.
Okay.
Ce qu'on a pu faire avec le sous-noir.
What we were able to do with the penny would not be possible with the current law. Another question? On legal tender, rather? Once we tell people that they can redeem their banknotes at the Bank of Canada, will retailers no longer be able to accept that money?
A transaction exchange is an exchange between two parties. What they use is up to them to determine. There is no obligation, or even now, for a retailer to accept money in a transaction unless they agree to do that. And that exists before and after the removal of legal tender status. Basically, what we're saying is that if that retailer who accepted that money that had legal tender status removed came to the government and tried to pay, let's say, its tax bill, it would not be accepted at that point. But between parties, there's always an agreement on what they're going to use in order to settle a transaction.
C'est bon, merci.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Lambert and Mr. Wall. Division, Part 6, Division 7, Payment, Clearing, and Settlement. If the witnesses could come forward. We have Miss Bordeaux? Miss Bordeaux, Senior Advisor, Finance Canada Financial Sector. Mr. Sample, Acting Director General, Capital Markets Division. Mr. Brown, I get Valancourt on here, Finance Canada. And Mr. Shand, I don't know if I got your name pronounced right, Bank of Canada. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening. Division 7 of Part 6 proposes to amend the Payment, Clearing, and Settlement Act to implement a financial market infrastructure resolution framework so that the appropriate toolkit is in place in the unlikely event that a systemically important FMI fails. Financial market infrastructures, which are known as FMIs, are hubs for financial transactions and facilitate the clearing, settling, and recording of payments. Certain FMIs are designated and overseen by the Bank of Canada if they are considered to pose systemic or payments risk. It is important that these designated FMIs continue operating even in times of stress. Therefore, these amendments would introduce a resolution framework to support the development of feasible, credible resolution plans for designated FMIs, and to provide a legal basis for federal authorities to intervene if a designated FMI is unable to recover from a stress event. These proposed changes would help preserve financial stability, maintain critical services of the FMIs, and minimize public exposure to loss during a financial crisis. Thank you.
Okay, just if I could ask myself, financial market infrastructure is what specifically?
So they conduct three types of different activities: payments, clearing, and settling. The four specific FMIs that we're referring to in this case that have been designated by the Bank of Canada and reside in Canada are the Large Value Transfer System, which is the only system for settling large value and time-critical Canadian dollar payments; the Automated Clearing Settlement System, or ACSS, which is a retail payment system for checks, direct deposits, and pre-authorized debits. And then there's two what we call central counterparties. The first is CDSX, which is the only system that settles securities and maintains a central securities depository. And the other one is Canadian Derivatives Clearing Service, or CDCS, which is a central counterparty for fixed income securities and repurchase agreements.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions? We're all in, all done. That is unusual. Thank you very much for your testimony. Must have been a clear explanation. Thank you, folks. Turning to Division 8, which is Canadian International Trade Tribunal Act from where's Ms. Villeneuve on here. Ms. Villeneuve, Economist Trade Rules at International Trade and Finance Branch, and Ms. Govier, I may not have that pronounced right either, Senior Director, Trade Rules, International Trade and Finance Branch. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Amendments to the Canadian International Trade Tribunal Act, or CITT Act, in relation to the appointment of tribunal members. The CITT is a quasi-judicial tribunal that conducts inquiries and hears appeals on various aspects of trade policy. Its mandate includes conducting injury inquiries for anti-dumping and countervailing duty or safeguard investigations in Canada's trade remedy system, hearing government procurement complaints related to Canada's free trade agreements, and adjudicating appeals on customs and excise tax matters. The tribunal is composed of up to 7 members, including a chairperson, who are appointed by the Governor and Council for a term of up to 5 years. La partie 6, section 8 de la loi d'exécution du budget comprend 3
Division 8 of Part 6 amends the CITT Act in order to create 1 vice chairperson position. There will always be a maximum of 7 members, but there will be a chairperson and vice chairperson. The second clarifies rules concerning members' eligibility for reappointment, and the third clarifies rules concerning the interim replacement of the chairperson and vice chairperson. These changes will help provide greater clarity, flexibility, and efficiency in the appointment of CITT members.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dussault.
Il y a une référence à 60.
There's a reference to 60 days, so you don't need the government in council approval if it's less than 60 days. Why 60 days? Is there a specific reason? And if so, if not, why do you have the number 60?
Something that existed in the previous law, and I think it's just because with a period under 60 days, it's considered a very short-term replacement, so perhaps the higher level improvement isn't required, contrary to a longer-term replacement.
Give latitude.
So there is no change in the total number of people, though, on the tribunal?
That's correct.
It's just adding a position.
That's correct.
With the same individual. Mr. Commish, and then, did you want to end? Mr. Commish, and then Mr. Albus.
Pour les titulaires qui reçoivent.
For those who hold a position as a permanent member of this group, has this been a problem in the past that the chair did not show up for a meeting? I'm just wondering why you're having a vice chair position. Is there a genuine need? Were meetings canceled because the chair did not show up?
Situations like that, usually the replacement of the chair would be for a longer term vacancy in the position. For example, if a chair's term had expired and a new chair had not yet been appointed, or if there had been an illness or some other long-term issue. So it's not about the issue of the short-term coverage or any issues that have arisen there. There were actually vice chair positions in the past, 2 vice chair positions that were phased out, resulting from budget cuts in 2011. And the intent really here is to make it much clearer if there is that kind of a gap in the chair position, who the appropriate person who would be acting in that position would be. Right now, it can be any of the other members and requires.
So is there a pay
decision.
difference between vice chair and regular member?
Pardon me, sorry?
So, because these are all permanent members here.
Yes.
So obviously there's a pay difference between vice chair and chair?
There is, yes.
And what is it?
I'm not sure of the exact amount between vice chair and chair. I know between the vice chair and the members, it's approximately $40,000 per year.
40?
$40,000 per year. The chair is, I think, perhaps 2 levels above that. I'm not sure of the exact amount.
Okay. So you said there were vice chair positions before that were eliminated for budgetary reasons.
Yes.
And what was that?
I was part of the deficit reduction action plan.
So we don't have a deficit anymore, so it's totally fine. Okay, good. Just checking.
Mr. Albus.
Okay, so just in regards to this, obviously the rationale would be some more meetings can be carried on if there's a delay of the chair or if the chair has not been reappointed. for example. So is this a problem where where the efficiency of the tribunals are being in question, and this is to make them more productive? Is there an increased amount of hearings that need to be done?
The tribunal certainly is facing a fairly busy time right now. There have not been any issues in terms of being unable to have enough members to fulfill their work or anything of that nature. Really, the idea behind these different amendments is to clarify certain aspects of the Act, and in the case of the vice chair position, just to ensure that there is sort of a clear second in command, if you will, if there are vacancies in the chair position. But it's not related to any kind of existing vacancy or concerns that have happened in recent times.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you both for answering our questions. That completes Division 8. Division 9, Canadian High Arctic Research Station, an application of an order in Nunavut. All three witnesses are representing Crown, Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. Mr. Barhold, Director, Northern Governance and Partnership Directorate. Ms. Annie Moulin, who's Acting Director, Arctic Science Policy Integration, Northern Affairs, and Mr. Pagowski, I think.
Hi, I'll be speaking to the Canadian High Arctic Research Station Act, and my colleague here will be speaking to the application of an order in Nunavut. Le ministère des Relations couronnes.
The Crown Indigenous Affairs Relationship manages the construction of the research station in the Stream Arctic in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut. Once it will be built, it will take care of, it will be the station for Polar Knowledge Canada. This is the last step in the creation of this new research,
whereby the transfer of federal real property from one federal organization to another can take place, either from one minister to another or via a Crown corporation. Polar Knowledge Canada is a departmental corporation, and Minister Bennett is responsible for both Polar Knowledge Canada as well as the department holding the real property that is to be transferred. Therefore, neither conditions are met. The proposed amendments to the Act would address this inconsistency by allowing Polar Knowledge Canada to be treated as a Crown corporation solely for the purpose of transferring the federal real property. Merci.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Barhold.
Thank you. In 2014, the Northwest Territory Devolution Act repealed an important order in Council regarding games declared in danger of becoming extinct. An unforeseen consequence of this repeal is that the legislature of Nunavut may no longer have the clear authority to restrict or prohibit Indigenous people from hunting for food game. This situation creates a regulatory gap and uncertainty for the government of Nunavut in its ability to manage wildlife. Therefore, the proposed initiative would clarify that the order in Council is deemed to have continued to be enforced and to apply in Nunavut. This would provide the necessary authority and would cover the period from the time of the repeal of the order in April 2014 and going forward. Cette disposition rétroactive garantirait la validité des...
This retroactive provision would ensure the validity of legislative actions taken by the government of Nunavut under the Nunavut Act and ensure greater certainty in relation to wildlife management for the benefit of Indigenous peoples and all Canadians.
These measures related to the Canadian High Arctic Research Station Act and the Nunavut Act. We are ready to answer the questions you may have.
Mr. McLeod.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask, I want to know how did the Northwest Territories Devolution Act accidentally impact Nunavut's ability to manage their own wildlife? And maybe you could give me an example of how that happens.
For sure. As an example, when the Nunavut Act was negotiated and created, basically they took the NWT Act and just copy-pasted everything. For some reason, Nunavut also has the ability to manage wood, and we all know that there's not a lot of wood in Nunavut. So basically, when the NWT Devolution Act repealed orders in council, it was an oversight, and the order in council was repealed for Nunavut as well. Does that answer your question?
So I guess it's the same thing for the forest fire money.
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay.
The second comment applies to this section of the Part 6. Any questions over here, Mr. Dussault?
Est-ce que vous voulez dire l'effet de...
Do you mean that the amendment that we're studying here means that the Species at Risk Act, well, obviously it applies across Canada, it will apply in Nunavut as well. Is there a gap that means that that we need to, that the game declared in danger of becoming extinct was no longer covered since 2014? It was repealed in 2014, but it doesn't concern the Species at Risk Act, which is managed by the Department of Environment. Both laws are needed to adequately manage wildlife resources in the territory. And currently, we're trying to legal vacuum. Okay, not for species at risk as such.
Is there other, the idea of treating something like treating an entity as a crown corporation for this purpose, has that happened before? It's not a crown corporation, but you're treated as a crown corporation for a specific decision or sale or whatever. Is there other instances where that's happened, or is this a new development?
I'm not aware of it, but I can get back to the committee if that's
okay. No, I just find that that's strange that you're acting like a crown corporation, but you're not. If you can find an example, find it. That's it, I believe, on this division. Mr. Dussault.
Juste en termes de...
The numbers. What does this transfer involve? The transfer of all the assets, furniture, and so on. Is this significant? We're transferring the administration to another organization, from Crown Relations to another organization. It's simply the administration as such. The administration of the station will be transferred from one department to another. With regard to costs and so on, the new department has the funds to manage the center. And the buildings are worth how much? Do we know? The construction? I don't have the number with me, but I can provide it. I'm not familiar with this station, this center. It's quite large. There will be 2 complexes, 4 buildings in all, 4 distinct buildings, a large research center, an administrative building, and 2 other buildings with lodging for visiting researchers. So it's a big complex. All right. Major assets, almost 7,000 square meters, in fact.
The north, Mr. McLeod, thank you very much for your information. Then turning to District 10, Canadian Institutes of Health Research Act, and Mr. Sylvain, who is Director General, Corporate and Government Affairs, Canadian Institutes for Health Research. Welcome, and you know the drill.
Monsieur le Président, bonsoir à tous.
Chair.
The Canadian Institutes of Health Research Act are being proposed in this bill. I'll describe them very briefly. The first, is, and perhaps most important, is to separate the roles of president and chairperson of the governing council. Currently, these two roles are combined and held by the same person. The second is to simplify the language to describe the responsibility of the governing council to establish policies and to clarify to whom certain powers can be delegated. Le troisième est pour s'assurer que la version française de la...
And the third would ensure that the French version of the law is clear because the word président is used to designate the chair and the president of the organization, leading to confusion.
Governance of our agency. I'm happy to answer questions you may have.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Sylvain? Hearing, we will have a quick one from Mr. Albas, obviously.
Yeah, just there's 18 members on the board.
Up to 18 members.
And
we
so
currently have 6.
Is that to represent just a diverse confederation? Are there provincial representatives and then an executive, or that's just a really large group?
Yes, it is in part to capture the diversity of the health research community in the country, which is 13,000 strong, and so many different disciplines, so many sectors, that we feel that a board of that magnitude is needed.
All right.
But we rarely have 18 members.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Dussault.
Je me demandais article 253.1.
I'm looking at 253.1 concerning the mandate of the Institute regarding the management responsibilities. I don't have the current law. The change here is that the term with regard to developing policies appears twice in the law. This creates internal confusion. The idea is that we will combine the two paragraphs into a single one, giving the full authority to the Board of Directors between 14A and G, paragraphs A and G, in other words.
Mr. Sylvain, then moving on to Division 11, the Red Tape Reduction Act, Miss Richat, with the Treasury Board Secretariat, Executive Director, Regulatory Cooperation. Welcome, Janine. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak this evening about the government's plans to amend the Red Tape Reduction Act. The Red Tape Reduction Act establishes a one-for-one rule to control the amount of administrative burden that is imposed on business through Government of Canada regulations. Whenever a new or an amended regulation is brought forward by a department, they must take out an equal value of administrative burden, and they must also remove a regulatory title. To date, we have seen a net reduction of 123 regulations and 30.1 million in annual administrative burden. Présentement, la loi sur la réduction de la paperasse s'applique.
Currently, this law applies only to Canadian federal regulations. These new amendments will allow Canadian regulators to use administrative burden reductions on Canadian businesses resulting from other jurisdictions' regulatory measures, for example, in the U.S., when these measures were taken as part of a formal an initiative, for example, a formal regulatory cooperation initiatives with the U.S. We currently have them equally with the EU. The purpose is to incentivize regulators to take actions, working closely with their counterparts to reduce the red tape, which could be to the detriment of international commerce.
Mr. Sabara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. If I'm understanding this division correctly, that any new regulation brought in by the federal government needs an offset and could be an offset by another level of jurisdiction, whether it's provincial, municipal, or international organization. Is that correct, or does it have to be offset strictly with another federal government rule regulation of the sort?
So the rule, the way that it works now, anytime a federal regulation comes in within that portfolio, so if the Minister of Health brings in a new regulation, within the health portfolio, she must remove administrative burden in an equal amount as well as a title. What this law would do is it would allow administrative burden reductions that are taken as a consequence of actions perhaps by her counterpart, the Food and Drugs Administration in the U.S. at the federal level. She would be allowed to calculate that in her offsets in the health portfolio.
But so not necessarily. Right now, the way the rule is, she has to do an offset within her portfolio, within their portfolio, portfolio, and this would allow them to just do an offset if just an FDA rule changed, but not necessarily something else changed within their portfolio currently.
Yes, that's right. If the change in the U.S. federal regulation had cost savings, administrative cost savings for Canadian businesses, that could count in her bank of offsets.
Okay, and just not to belabor this point, if the FDA acted to increase regulatory burden that impacted our side, would we then not have to offset that?
No. No, the purpose, the objective behind this is to incite regulatory cooperation. Federal departments have indicated that in its present form, the one-for-one rule does not always encourage them to work with their counterparts in other jurisdictions to find ways to align their regulatory frameworks. This is meant to demonstrate to them that when you work together to align a framework and there's a cost reduction, then you can count that as your offset.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Dussault.
So do you mean that if a counterpart adds a regulation and on the one-for-one rule, it would give the Canadian department the right to add another one? So
No,
to balance it out. Yeah.
It's only in the case of a reduction. The rule would not kick in the case of an increase of administrative burden in the U.S. And I would point out that the U.S. has just instituted a 2-for-1, so it's unlikely that we'll see any increases in burden that would impact Canadian businesses as a result, since they're also undertaking an exercise to reduce burden on business. But the rule would only apply in the case of a cost reduction, not a cost increase.
But in case of a cost reduction, so a reduction of administrative burden in the U.S., for example, it would give, for example, Health Canada the right or the authority to take one burden, one measure. So it would, like you said, it would give in her bank of regulations. It would give her the right to put another one.
Yeah, she would be able to put that in her bank. That's exactly a good analogy and one that we use often. She would put that credit in her bank, and so that if she did bring forward a regulation that increased administrative burden, she'd be able to use that amount from her bank as her offset. So yes, she would be able to bring in an additional burden because she'd already have an offset from the regulatory cooperation initiative that's been undertaken with her partner in the U.S.
So as long as the other countries and partners around the world, as long as they are good to reduce burden, Canada can, as much at the same pace, increase the burden on Canadian business in Canada.
Well, the Canadian regulators will still always have to pay very close attention to any increase in administrative burden because of the one-for-one rule in general. So they can't just increase burden without a commensurate amount being removed.
But it could be another country in that case.
But it's removed on Canadian business. So if it's only removed on American business, this rule will not apply. The impact has to be quantified and felt here in Canada. I would also point out, because I'm not sure that I was clear enough in my statement, it only applies where we have formal regulatory cooperation arrangements. So right now we have one under the CETA with the EU, we have the Regulatory Cooperation Council with the US, and we have the Canadian Free Trade Agreement established a regulatory cooperation table as well. So it's only in those situations. It's not with just any country without whom we have an arrangement.
Yeah, the title is Offset Regulatory Cooperation.
Yes, yes.
Mr. Albas.
I think it was Mr. Kmitch.
Or Mr.
No, I just wanted to, well, you go first.
Okay, Mr. Kamish.
Thank you, Mr. Albas. So generous of you. Like you answered one question I was going to ask about the formal, but my other question is the removal of a regular title from the existing stock. I have it in bullets here. Ministers have like 24 months.
That's right.
So I guess my question is, if this is introduced, how many are there that are still outstanding to meet that requirement of the 1-for-1 rule that will then fall under this new rule that allows them to have an offset through formal cooperation with another jurisdiction? Like, how many are still outstanding to meet the requirements?
So I think I just want to make sure I understand the question. You're wondering how many departments have not, their 24 months still haven't run out. I actually don't have the specifics on that, on how many might be left. We publish an annual report to Parliament on the cost in and cost out under the rule. I'm not sure if I know with specificity, but I will go back and I will check and I will endeavor to find an answer to that question. Yes.
Thank you. And then the other question I had was about Section 5.1, the control of administrative burden. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but there's 4 words being added, imposed by regulation on the last line. What is that supposed to encompass?
I'm sorry, I'm just going to find my...
So it's Section 260, subsection 5.1 of the English version of the Act is replaced by the following, and it says control of administrative burden.
And that's 260, was that right?
Yeah.
So the purpose of that clause is to amend the English version of the Act to clarify that the reference to administrative burden in Section 5 of the Act relates to administrative burden that is imposed by Canadian federal regulation, so not by American regulation, for example.
Okay, which was the exchange you had before.
Yes.
So then, just so I understand this completely, only through formal cooperation under the CETA body that you mentioned, let's say, so Germany has a rule that the federal government engages with, says this rule is bad for Canadian companies. Can we find a way to harmonize it with ours to make shipping easier, let's say? And if they change their rule, then it would count towards, say, the Minister of International Trade's amounts, the 1-for-1 rule, so they would get to tick it off?
As long as they can quantify administrative burden reductions for Canadian business, yes, they can put it in their bank account, so to speak.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Albas.
So the new definition for other jurisdiction, why would we include a province or a municipality within the country?
So the reason for including the provinces is because the Canadian Free Trade Agreement established a regulatory reconciliation and cooperation table. And so there are examples where we are actively working right now to establish our first work plan, actually, under this table. So there may be examples where changes that come from that regulatory cooperation arrangement will reduce administrative burden.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that the mechanism for outside of the country, like, for example, the U.S. or CETA, to me, that makes a lot of sense and encourages more business between countries. I think, though, that the idea of harmonizing within Canada should just be a non sequitur. That's something that we should be doing every day. I do look forward, though, to the committee receiving the Red Tape Reduction Act report to Parliament. I haven't viewed this, the most previous one, or most recent one, I should say. But I do appreciate the work that's being done. And I think this particular section, at least on international cooperation, I think is a very good measure.
Mr. Commission, then Mr. Polyev.
So just to go back then to Section 261, the offset regulatory cooperation, there's a new series of paragraphs being introduced, and it includes, with the approval of the Treasury Board. Was Treasury Board involved in approving what a department was considering sufficient quantification for the purposes of the red tape 1-for-1 rule? Is that new, the Treasury Board's secretary will be involved?
No, we've always administered it at the Treasury Board Secretariat, yes.
Perfect.
What do you consider to be a unit of burden?
Well, administrative burden, I'm sorry, I'm having such trouble with my earpiece here. A unit of burden, we have, and I must apologize, I'm not an economist by any stretch. I don't necessarily understand the cost calculator that we use. We have economists who do that for us, but we have a very specific methodology that calculates administrative burden. Generally speaking, administrative burden is paperwork. So, for example, forms that you have to fill out to demonstrate how you comply. But we do have a very specific cost calculator that it's standardized, so all departments calculate it in the same way, and that's why we're able to know the amount that we have saved as a result of the Red Tape Reduction Act.
So when you eliminate, when you're trying to trade one elimination for one addition, it's not rule for rule, it's dollar for dollar?
It's a bit of both, actually. It's dollar for dollar, which I would say is the part that is really most tied to the reduction of the actual burden on business, the dollar for dollar. The second component of the rule is removing a title. So every time you introduce new admin burden, you have to dollar for dollar remove the amount that you've introduced, but you also have to take one title off of your regulatory stock. And in a way, what it's done is it's kind of compelled departments to clean up their stock that they hadn't necessarily cleaned up in quite a while. So when the rule was introduced, it really sort of allowed for that, for departments to take a look at their regulations to be able to remove the titles that were really no longer necessary.
But can they get credit for removing those titles as a reduction in burden, even though some of those titles are really not even being enforced or relevant anymore?
The title that they have to remove has to contain admin burden within it. And so they have been able to take credit for some that they have no longer, that maybe have been spent or that have no longer been relevant. But from a monetary perspective, it has always had to be dollar for dollar. So they've always had to remove the commensurate amount.
And since the Act took effect, what has been the dollar value reduction in administrative burden?
It's 30.1 million net annual.
Net annual. And to clarify the change in the Act, in the proposed budget bill, if a foreign government with whom we have regulatory cooperation reduces burden on Canadian businesses, does that, for the department relevant to get credit, must the Canadian government have made a corresponding reduction, or must it simply be a lighter burden on the Canadian business doing commerce in the foreign jurisdiction which originated the change?
There's no requirement for the Canadian government to do a commensurate with let's use the U.S. as the example. In these amendments, there would be no requirement for the Canadian government to do a commensurate reduction. But I would note that in the implementation of the 2-for-1 that is currently being brought into force in the U.S., our counterpart, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, in the policy guidance that they issued to U.S. regulators, they noted to U.S. regulators that if Canadian regulators, through regulatory cooperation, decreased burden quantifiably on American business, then they could count that in their 2-for-1 regime. So there is a bit of reciprocity in that sense, in that both Canada and the U.S., probably because of our Regulatory Cooperation Council, which has been quite successful since 2011, we've recognized that burden reductions in one jurisdiction are positive for the other jurisdiction when really we're a very similar common marketplace.
Right, but I could understand the rationale in giving a Canadian department credit for a burden reduction that it instituted as part of cross-border cooperation. Where I'm having a hard time is understanding why that department would get credit for what its foreign counterpart does. I don't understand that. Can you give me the rationale?
They get credit because they have been working formally under a regulatory cooperation arrangement with their counterpart. So in other words, really that that reduction is the result of work that that regulator has been doing. Generally speaking, formal regulatory cooperation initiatives have regulators work together to develop work plans, and those work plans are meant to reduce burden on business in both jurisdictions. But the rationale really is that the Canadian regulator is not doing nothing in this scenario. They're actively working with their partner in the U.S., and together they've come up with a regulatory cooperation work plan, the output of which may just require a change in one jurisdiction, but that still reduces burden here at home, and it is the result of a cooperative arrangement.
So what documentation would a department have to claim credit for a foreign reduction in paper burden?
They would have to be able to quantify, similar to how they would have to quantify here in Canada. So we would likely be applying the same costing that we apply to the Canadian.
That's not my question. My question is, what would they have to do to prove that they had any role whatsoever in reducing the foreign government's?
Sorry, I misunderstood the question. There would be a formal work plan under either the Regulatory Cooperation Council or the Regulatory Cooperation Forum with the EU or the Canadian Free Trade Agreement Reconciliation and Cooperation Table. So that would be the demonstration.
I still have a really hard time understanding why a Canadian government department, whether it's holding meetings with foreign governments or not, should take credit for regulatory reductions in those foreign jurisdictions. I understand that we're in a global economy and we're an open economy and all of that, but I don't understand how the public is served by empowering our departments to add new regulations just because foreign governments got rid of old ones.
But does it not mean that when the regulatory change was made in, say, United States, it lessens the amount of administrative burden for a business here? Is that not how it works?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, I totally understand. I think that's absolutely terrific if it happens. But just because something good happens to Canadians outside of Canada doesn't mean something bad has to happen to them within Canada. The Trump administration is insisting on massive reduction in regulations, and that will obviously reduce the burden on Canadian businesses who operate there. I don't understand why the Canadian government should get credit, should be then empowered to impose new regulations here at home. Even if they've been having working groups, I still don't see how that changes anything.
Certainly the objective is not to empower new regulations without taking into account the burden. And I would say that the government is also, through this budget, has also proposed a number of this is one component of a regulatory agenda that's being pursued at this moment. There's also stock reviews in key sectors that were also announced in the budget. There's also some money that was set aside for an e-portal. So globally, there's quite a lot of effort in my shop to look at other ways to really foster innovation, agility, and reduce burden on business. This is, I would say, one piece of a larger regulatory puzzle.
I appreciate it, but even if those other pieces do good work, I am not seeing why we want to weaken the Red Tape Reduction Act by giving Canadian departments the legal authority to add new red tape just because some foreign government got rid of some red tape and that we attended working group meetings with them before they did.
I understand the concern you're raising. I would say that regulatory cooperation is, in a world where tariffs have been significantly reduced, perhaps notwithstanding some of the most recent events in the U.S., the biggest barriers to trade are really these technical barriers to trade that come from regulation. What we have seen is that regulators require incentives in order to embark on some of these regulatory cooperation initiatives, which ultimately have the same goal, which is to reduce burden on Canadian businesses, as well as to increase choice of goods in the marketplace for Canadian consumers. So the regulatory cooperation agenda is one that is meant overall to really reduce unnecessary burdens that are the result of duplicative requirements. And this is one tool in the toolkit that the government is trying to give itself.
Well, it sounds like a tool to me that will do more damage than repair. What I worry about is that the American, I mean, it could be really damaging actually, because the American government is massively reducing its regulatory burden. Obviously, that will reduce the burden on Canadian businesses operating there. And if the federal government takes that as a signal that it can add regulations by taking credit for the reductions south of the border, then we could be in a situation where, ironically, we are not only falling behind competitively on taxes, but moving in deliberate diametrical opposing directions on regulation as well. You know, we're adding a regulation because you cut one.
We don't necessarily have to add one.
No,
correct?
but you're giving government departments credit. You're giving them the legal authority to add regulations which they would not otherwise have without this amendment.
I expect you would be able to outline that point to the minister in the speech on final reading.
But would it not? I
He'd
mean,
get the
ultimately,
message.
if the government in the United States of America massively reduces the regulatory burden, as it has begun already, all your departments would have to do to have the legal authority to add new ones is say, well, we had a working group with the Commerce Department in the States, so they cut a regulation, we get to add one over here. Or, you know, the EPA in the States has made it easier to develop natural resources, so that'll help Canadian companies doing business down there.
I think, Mr. Polyev, we're getting into the political arena of the decision.
No,
I think
Mr. Chair, we're not.
Yes, we are. Ms. Rashat, I think, is outlining the point here in terms of whether or not we can add a regulation for one taken away by a foreign country is a political decision. She can't answer that question.
No, but Chair, if I may, the reality is this: we are looking at a piece of legislation that would empower the government to add that regulation. So I'm not commenting on the eventual political decision that a government or a department would make to add a regulation. I'm simply pointing out that this bill would give them new authorities to do so.
Be as it may, that's your point. Is there any further discussion on questions to Ms. Rashat? Okay, thank you, Ms. Rashat. Turning to Division 12. Hopefully we can get through this one. Canadian Security Establishment, Mr. Donald Parker. Director, Strategic Policy, Communication Security Establishment. Mr. Parker, I have a neighbor with exactly the same name as you. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Bonsoir, Monsieur le Président.
Good evening, Chair.
Opening comments as brief as possible this evening. Budget 2018 announced the government's intention to establish a Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. As part of this initiative, this portion of the Budget Implementation Act includes a provision to regroup technical cybersecurity experts from across three distinct parts of the public service within the communications security establishment. And so it's an administrative measure to move implicated employees. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Dussault.
Est-ce que ça veut dire que...
Does that mean that the Canadian Centre for Cybernetic, the Response Centre of Public Safety Canada, Operations Centre of Shared Services Canada, and and the Canadian Cyber Incident Response Centre will no longer exist, that they'll all be transferred to this new organization?
Sorry, thank you for the question. To be clear, it will be moving employees who currently reside within public safety, as well as employees who are currently with Shared Services Canada to become employees of the communication security establishment.
OK. Puis l'autre question, je sais pas.
My other question, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer it. I'm not an expert in translation, but in English it says managerial confidential position. For me, confidential means that it's confidential. And in French, you say management or de confiance. I'm not sure if confidential and confiance are the same thing. Perhaps it's not the right term in English.
Merci pour.
Thank you for your question. I'm not an expert in legislative draft.
Oui, s'il vous plaît, si vous voulez peut-être revenir au comité, avoir l'information soit des rédacteurs.
Perhaps you could get the information for the committee from the drafters or legal linguists, just to make sure we have the right term.
Is the difference confidential and confidence?
Yeah.
Confidentiel en français.
The section is what? What section?
265.3.
265.3.
Paragraph 3.
Mr. Commish.
Do any of these sections have material budgetary impact? Like, are there dollars associated with the redesignation of any of these employees?
Yes, there would be salary implications that would see and that would be transferred through a separate administrative measure. It's not contained within the Budget Act itself. It would be settled through the estimates process.
Okay, so you're saying that by doing these redesignation of jobs, certain people, I'm guessing, are going to be put into a higher classification. I doubt they'll be put into a lower classification jobs as they're being reassigned. Is that correct?
In fact, there would be, through this measure, no change to their salary or compensation. So from a budgetary perspective, it would be net.
Net zero, or near zero.
That's correct. What I meant to imply in my earlier answer, and apologies if I wasn't clear, was that the resources associated with those employees today would be transferred through that separate reconciliation process I referred to.
Okay. Yeah. I think I had that question as well. Tom, did you want in, Mr. Dussault?
On peut continuer.
Yeah, we're.
Keep going.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Parker. What am I hearing from you, Mr. Dussault? You want to keep going? I don't know whether people do. Do you want to go another half an hour? Pardon?
What number are we at?
We are making not bad progress. We are at number 12, Division 12.
Yeah, let's keep
I know Mr. Albas and I were at a meeting this morning at 6:45, but I guess if you folks are willing, we're willing. It's been a long day. Kate, we'll go another half an hour at least. Mr. Dussault.
Because I think if I was at the back of the room since 6:30, I would prefer getting it done tonight than coming back another.
I hear you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Parker, for your presentation. We'll turn to Division 13, Department of Employment and Social Development Act with ESDC. Mr. Singh, Director, Tier 1 Partnerships and Service Offerings for Federal Partners. and Ms. Lalonde Goldenberg, Director General Partners Development and Management Directorate, both with ESDC. The floor is yours.
Bonsoir, Monsieur le Président et les membres du comité.
Thank you, Chair and committee members.
Talk about some proposed amendments to the Department of Employment and Social Development Act to promote better service delivery to Canadians. As you know, the Department of Social Development, the Department of Employment and Social Development is responsible for delivery of many social programs to Canadians, including the Canada Pension Plan, the Old Age Security Act, employment insurance, to name a few. The department has an extensive network of service delivery, including online, on the phone, and an in-person presence of up to 150 points of service across the country. Like other departments, this department has the mandate to deliver its own services, but not deliver services for partners. Over the years, the department has been granted authorities to assist other partners, including other federal departments, in the delivery of their programs. It's achieved those authorities on a case-by-case basis, machinery decisions culminating in orders and councils that, for instance, have provided the department with the authority for the 1-800-O-Canada, the Canada.ca, and the delivery of domestic passport services. The case-by-case approach can be time-consuming, and once a mandate for a service delivery partnership authority is in place, then the department needs to go and get cost recovery authorities from the Treasury Board. Again, this case-by-case approach can be time-consuming and prevent nimble response to partnership service delivery that can assist Canadians. So the proposed amendments today to the departmental statute are to broaden the minister's mandate to provide authorities for service delivery partnerships. The partners that we're envisaging in this legislation are other federal partners, provincial, municipal, for instance, and also some Indigenous communities. What the provisions will allow the department to do is to provide services using the service delivery infrastructure. And they'll also clarify the responsibility for personal information collected in the service delivery partnership. Finally, they'll also permit the department to cost recover for the services that it provides to its partners. Another amendment proposed is to allow the department to use the business number, CRA's business number under the Income Tax Act, when it works with businesses to identify the validity of the businesses. So a few things to note. This is really a proposal that is machinery in nature. It does not seek funding, and it is permissive. It's not a mandatory mandate. Partners who would like to avail themselves of ESDC's service delivery network and expertise could come to the table and negotiate a partnership. The service delivery authorities are not directly related to any budget initiative, but they could facilitate some initiatives such as responsibility to improve access in Indigenous communities on reserves and in the north. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you. I have one question. Does this have any privacy implications with exchange of information between departments?
Pardon me? Could you repeat?
Does this proposal have any privacy implications on individuals with the exchange of information?
Okay. The Department of Employment and Social Development Act has provisions that provide for the management of personal information collected by the department for its programs. The provisions here will amend those particular personal informational management provisions to make it clear that the department will collect personal information for the partner for the service delivery, use it for the purpose for which it was collected to provide that service, and do nothing else with it but give it back to the partner who will protect the personal information under their regime. So it does not amend the Privacy Act, but only the provisions within the departmental statute.
Okay. Any questions, Mr. Dussault?
Juste rapidement, quel est le mécanisme?
Quickly, what is the mechanism for cost recovery? If a jurisdiction or another department asks you to act on its behalf, you will incur costs. And what is the mechanism that ensures that that department or jurisdiction pays for the service? There will be agreements, negotiations with regard to the costs, and the costs of the service will be covered by the partner through the usual measures and agreement. It's the legislative right to recover costs.
Thank you for the information, and we'll turn to Division 14. Thank you very much, Julie, Principal. Division 14, Employment Insurance Act, also with ESDC. Mr. Brown, Acting Director General, Employment Insurance Policy, and Ms. Scales, Director, Policy Analysis and Initiatives. Welcome. I'm not sure who's on deck. Mr. Brown? Okay.
Okay. Bonsoir. Good evening. And comme vous le savez peut-être,
as you may know, the employment insurance regime provides temporary support to workers who have lost their jobs, regular payments rather. And there are also special employment insurance benefits that are available throughout the career of a person. I'm here to talk about the amendment to the Employment Insurance Act, which determines how the claims are justice when workers have a job and receive claims at the same time. This is
provisions. Les dispositions ont pour but d'encourager les
the provisions will encourage claimants to accept agreement while receiving benefits.
Claimants do some work while receiving EI benefits, with women more likely than men to work at least 1 week while on claim. The current legislated provisions have been in place since 1971, and a series of pilot projects over the last 12 years have tested various approaches to adjusting EI benefits when a claimant earns income while receiving EI benefits. Budget 2018 proposed to make one of these approaches permanent. So I'll go through the amendments. First, the amendments proposed in the budget would make the default rule of the current pilot project permanent. Under these rules, workers retain all of their employment earnings, and EI benefits are reduced 50 cents for each dollar earned, up to 90% of their pre-claim earnings. Second, for a limited time, 3-year period, EI claimants that opted for the alternative treatment of earnings could continue to do so. This 3-year period would provide time for this small group of claimants to adapt to the permanent 50 cents on the dollar working while on claim rule. Third, working while on claim provisions would be extended to sickness and maternity claimants for the first time. Extending these rules to maternity and sickness claimants is not intended to encourage work. Rather, this change would allow workers to benefit from the same treatment as other claimants if they choose to stage their return to work, and they would be allowed to retain some additional income. And finally, there are some technical amendments included to ensure that the changes to the working while on claim rules do not result in unintended consequences on other aspects of the EI program, such as the waiting period and the EI premium reduction program. Comme il était indiqué dans le budget,
as stated in the budget, these measures should cost $351.9 million over 5 years and $81 million per year after that. According to the Employment Insurance Act, these will be charged to the employment insurance accounts and recovered through contributions to employment insurance.
18, if approved, to ensure that there's no interruption between the pilot provisions and the proposed new legislative provisions. Thank you.
Mr. Sabero.
How many people on an annual basis are employment insurance recipients? I use that term. Will this assist or benefit on a yearly basis?
So currently we see about 1.8 to 1.9 million recipients of EI benefits annually. Roughly 1.3 to 1.4 million receiving regular benefits and about 500,000 receiving EI special benefits. So those that are working while on claim currently number about 800,000.
So approximately 800,000 could possibly be eligible for this call it a top up, but this incremental benefit while they're working.
That's right. These are provisions that are administered essentially automatically through reporting by claimants. So every 2 weeks when they report on any earning that they've had while receiving EI benefits, then we make adjustments. That's Service Canada, who delivers the service, makes adjustments to the EI benefits that they receive.
Okay, and just in going, and this current pilot project is just de facto being made permanent, or one of the two. I think you mentioned there were two, or there were a few pilot projects, but this specific one's being made permanent.
That's correct. The default rule of the current pilot project is being made permanent, and the alternate rule of the current pilot project is being allowed to remain in place for a 3-year period, so that people over the current pilot, which is of 2-year duration, if they have opted for the alternative treatment, they will be allowed to opt into that for this 3-year period.
Okay. And one last question. The clawback rate, when you hit, I think you believe it was 50%, 50 cents or 50%, 90% of earnings. Is the clawback rate changed at all, or is this something that's just existing?
That's right. So once they've hit that 90%, then it is dollar for dollar beyond that until their EI benefits are reduced to zero.
Okay.
At the point where their benefits are reduced to zero, they simply do not receive an EI payment that week, and a claimant could still access that particular week of benefits later in their benefit period if needed.
Okay.
Mr. Dussault and then Mr. Polyev.
I'd just like to know, the problem that we're trying to solve is that of a claimant, an employment insurance claimant is better off staying at home rather than working a few hours per week. Is that correct?
That's correct. What we are trying, the object of the pilot projects has been to determine which measures have had a greater impact in terms of the incentive to work. Absent special rules in the program, when somebody earns $1, we would reduce their benefits by $1. And so these different measures have tested different ways to encourage work because now their benefits are only reduced by a portion of those earnings. And so the person then is receiving a greater total income in terms of their employment earnings and their EI benefit than if they did not work during that week.
Est-ce qu'on s'est basé sur des cas précis?
And is this based on specific cases when you decided to choose this measure? Without going into details, there's been a case in Sherbrooke. You may be familiar with this file. Was there a specific case or cases, and if that influenced your decision, and if so, how many? Your decision to make this amendment, that is.
So I would say that would not say that it's related to a particular case. What I would say is that it's taken a look at the EI program and its objectives to achieve an effective and efficient labor market. And so along with that is looking at measures within the program that would create an incentive to return to work, and that as this has been tested, a variety of approaches have been tested over a 12-year period, that this has been one that has been found to have a greater incentive, in particular because it offers a sustained incentive to work. In other words, if you work for one day, you are earning some additional income. If you work for a second day, if you work for a third day, you continue to be earning greater income overall. Some of the approaches in the past have had a threshold beyond which those incentives disappeared. And so for someone who worked beyond one day of work for the week, they would complain, I would say, that they're working for nothing because the EI program would be reducing their benefits $1 for each dollar of earnings. So this is a different approach where it is 50 cents on the dollar.
I could give you a specific sample, lots of them in PEI. In the potato industry, in the winter months when potato growers need somebody to grade potatoes, they might need them for 2.5 days. Somebody in EI could work one, but to work their second day or at least their third half day, it would actually cost them more to work than not to work because they, number one, had to drive to work because they were losing dollar for dollar. And so it does two things. It hurts the person who's on unemployment and it affects the economy by not being available for work. Mr. Polyev.
That is a good point, and I wanted to know if you have any data on the impact on labor market participation by EI recipients who have been eligible over the years for this pilot, as compared to those who were not.
So I guess first off, so any claimant who has been doing some work while on claim would have been eligible to receive this treatment. And with the exception of maternity and sickness claimants, where currently they face dollar-for-dollar reductions. Otherwise, for anyone who is receiving regular benefits for job loss, fishing benefits, parental benefits, compassionate care, and parental benefits, I think I've caught them all now, they would have automatically been eligible for this measure.
Since what year?
So in 2005 is when the series of pilots began. When they initially began, they were regional in nature, and so there have been some adjustments to the pilots over the years, as well as making them national in scope rather than regional.
And so they were piloted. Presumably the department kept data on the results of the pilots, and because they originally rolled out in patches rather than being national, do we have any data comparing people who were eligible to those who were not at the time, or longitudinal data that compares the way people behaved before the pilots were introduced versus how they behaved after they were introduced?
Okay. Yes, so I'm going to turn to Ms. Scales to comment.
Thank you for your question. The annual report on the EI program is presented to Parliament every year. Within this annual report on the monitoring and assessment report on the EI program, we do report on the results of the pilot projects dating back to 2005. What I can tell you is that this current pilot number 20, was included in a suite of pilot projects that were evaluated recently. In the 2017 evaluation, the results from pilot projects 18 and 19, which also used the 50% rule, those found that the probability of working while on claim rose by about 11%, and the number of weeks worked increased by about 1 week for claimants that were using the 50% rule.
And have you calculated whether that reduces the net cost of employment insurance? If you compare that behavioral change, if you take that behavioral change into consideration and you compare it to the extra cost associated with bringing about that behavioral change, is the government better off financially? Is this EI system better off financially by having the pilot than otherwise?
Yes, the increase in work while on claim led to a decline in EI benefits paid of at least $100 per claim.
And what does that work out to total? Ballpark.
I would have to go back
Okay.
and ask an analyst. So the effect being that the claimants, in fact, bring home more income because they have their EI benefits, exactly, and they also have their income from employment. But the EI account itself sees savings as a result of the rule.
Right. So everyone's better off, the EI account and the claimant as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Ms. Scales, Division 15, Judges Act, Justice Canada. Ms. McKinnon, Senior Counsel, Judicial Affairs, Courts and Tribunal Policy. And Ms. Decker, Counsel, Judicial Affairs, Courts and Tribunal Policy. Welcome, Ms. McKinnon. You are on the floor.
Good evening. Ms. Decker and I will be speaking to Division 15, which contains amendments to the Judges Act and the Federal Courts Act to create new judicial positions for the provincial superior courts and the federal court. I will be speaking briefly about the changes that impact the provincial superior courts, and Ms. Decker will speak to the changes to the federal court complement. So in terms of the provincial superior courts, you will see that the amendments propose an increase to the complement of the Ontario Superior Court of Justice by 6 judges and an increase to the complement of the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal by 1 judge. And these new judicial positions are responsive to demonstrated existing and projected workload pressures in these courts and will assist them in dealing with their caseloads in a timely manner. The funding for these new judges is effective immediately, and new appointments can be made to these positions once the necessary legislative amendments are in place authorizing the salaries. In addition, the proposed amendments will create a pool of 39 new judicial positions for Unified Family Courts, or UFCs, in Canada. So just to briefly explain, the UFC model is designed to enhance access to the family justice system by consolidating all jurisdiction over family law matters in a single level of court, the Superior Court. The UFC provides a core of judges who are specialized in family law and promotes simplified procedures and the use of a full range of community and support services. The UFC model is found presently in some Canadian jurisdictions, but not all of them. It is up to each province and territory to determine the court structure that best meets their needs. Provinces and territories pay the administrative costs associated with the UFC, while the federal government appoints and pays the UFC judges. These 39 new UFC positions are intended to support the introduction of the UFC model in key sites in Alberta, the next significant phase of UFC expansion in Ontario, and the completion of the model province-wide in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador. The funding for the UFC positions is effective as of April 1st, 2019, and the bill includes a coming into force provision to this effect so that judicial appointments to the new UFC positions can be made after this date. And the intervening period will allow time for the necessary steps to be taken to implement the UFC in the new sites. And I'll now turn to Ms. Decker for the federal court changes.
Thank you. I'll speak briefly to the amendments that would authorize the salaries for a new Associate Chief Justice for the Federal Court and create one new position for that court through the Federal Courts Act amendments. A new Associate Chief Justice would share the managerial responsibilities that are currently borne by the Chief Justice alone. So this position would allow the Chief Justice to devote more time to hearing cases, for example, and writing judgments, which are both important components of providing effective leadership for a court. This position would be created through the conversion of a puisne judge into the Associate Chief Justice position. At the same time, an additional judge would be added to the federal court to address projected increases in workload, for example, in the area of immigration cases. So we would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
We spent considerable time on this issue this afternoon with witnesses, and I can say certainly the proposal certainly made the Law Society of Ontario happy, and a professor of law from Queen's University. That was the discussion this afternoon. Mr. Dussault.
Ma question, c'est merci d'être là.
Thank you for being here. My question concerns Article 305, when the federal judge the Chief Justice cannot be at the court. Did the law not already have a mechanism in place to replace, on an interim basis, the Chief Justice of the federal court?
The addition is that instead of just being the judge that the Chief Justice would designate, now the first option would go to the Associate Chief Justice, and only if the Associate Chief Justice is not available, then it would go to the next one down the line.
OK. C'est un amendement conséquent à la nouvelle position de...
It's an amendment that takes into account this new position of Associate Chief Justice. I also have a question with regard to language 297, clause 297. There's mention of the salary of $345,700,000, whereas in English it's stated each $344,400. Why is this term not added in French, this term each?
So when the drafting is done on the Judges Act, what you would see is that in the French provisions, it's done slightly differently. So when the drafters would add a new position to the court, they would simply try to model what is done in other courts so that there is internal consistency among the languages, and it's just done slightly differently as between the two languages. But in each case, it's clear that only the Chief Justice and the Associate Chief Justice would be receiving that particular salary.
OK. Fait que c'est par continuité avec les autres. Et...
In order to be coherent with other laws, then. And is there a reason why I have the same salary? It doesn't appear to be the same level.
All of the Chief Justices and Associate Chief Justices across the Superior Courts, which includes all of the provincial Superior Courts, whether trial or appellate, as well as the federal courts, so the Federal Court of Appeal and Tax Court of Canada, wherever there is a Chief Justice and an Associate Chief Justice and or a Senior Associate Chief Justice where they exist, all of those positions receive the same salary, which is paid to all managerial judges across Superior Courts.
Thank you. It's consistent.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. McKinnon. Ms. Decker. Oh, you were on the list? Yeah. All right, you're on. Sorry, you're not gone yet.
Ça va être très rapide, je pense que parce qu'il y a...
It'll be fast. There are questions on the Unified Family Courts. I'd like to know, what will the delay be between the coming into effect in 2019 and the current hiring of judges? And can you anticipate the delay? And how can we work upstream to already put these judges to work as quickly as possible?
So thank you for the question. The authorization for the appointments will be effective as of April 1st, 2019. So as of any time after that date, it will be possible for appointments to be made. Of course, there are steps that need to be taken in advance because the judges who are appointed to the Unified Family Courts will have to apply through the regular Superior Court's appointments process. So it could be family law lawyers who wish to apply for the Unified Family Court, or it may also be judges who are in the provincial family courts who may wish to express their interest in that court. And so there will be efforts made to ensure that the locations where the Unified Family Courts will be established, that the family law practitioners and judges are aware that these opportunities and new positions will be coming available, so that the steps, if they are interested in making their application, they can do so. And as well, there will be the whole process where the judicial advisory committees who assess the applications will have an opportunity to do so and make recommendations with respect to those candidates. But we are not in a position to say when specifically each new position will be filled.
I guess my question was trying to anticipate what you would estimate would be the length of delay between the positions coming into force and them actually being filled.
So I'm not sure that I can say. I think that everyone is, as I understand, heard this afternoon, very excited to have these new courts be established and operationalized. So I think everyone who's involved, be it the potential candidates, the judicial advisory committees, and then of course Minister of Justice and the Governor and Council who makes the appointments, will be making best efforts to fill the vacancies as quickly as possible when they're authorized.
And caucus, Greg, tell the minister to get this done and fast. That it? Yeah. Thank you both. Then financial sector legislative renewal, and we heard a fair bit about this afternoon as well. From finance, we have several people. Ms. Berzeau, Senior Director, Framework Policy. Mr. Dussault, Senior Director, Framework Policy. Yes. Yes, we are. We're going to try and finish.
5 more sections.
Ms. Talsma, Senior Economist, Sector Policy Analysis. Mr. Whale, Senior Project Leader, and I'm missing one. Oh. Okay, and Mr. Sample, who I believe we met with before, Acting Director General, Capital Markets Division. The floor is yours, Mr. Dussault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Part 6, Division 16 of the bill, entitled Financial Sector Renewal, proposes amendments as part of the financial sector legislative review prior to the statutory sunset date of March 29, 2019. The periodic sunset of financial sector legislation is designed to ensure that the financial sector framework is reviewed regularly and that it remains effective and technically sound. The Department of Finance began the financial sector legislative review in 2016. Over the course of 2016 and 2017, the department led comprehensive public consultations with stakeholders in order to understand their priorities and perspective. Through these consultations, we heard that the financial sector framework is functioning well and that the foundational elements of the framework continue to be supported. These elements include strong and clear mandates for financial sector regulatory agencies and a principles-based approach to regulation. They also include a separation between banking and insurance activities, which we are not proposing to reform. Stakeholders also told us that certain targeted updates would help Canada's financial sector keep pace with global developments and the changing needs of businesses and consumers. To that end, amendments are being proposed in 4 priority areas. La législation proposée vise...
The legislation proposes 4 major reforms in the financial framework. First of all, providing more latitude to financial institutions so that they can undertake activities regarding fintech and to benefit from them, to make a profit from them. Second of all, with regard to prudential regulations such as cooperative credits, they would have the necessary latitude to use generic banking terms in communications. Third of all, the modifications would allow life insurance companies and medical insurance companies to invest in the long term in infrastructures. And finally, changes would be made with regard to sunset provisions to extend them to 5 years after approval of the budget. I'd like to talk first of all about the infrastructure modifications.
The Insurance Companies Act to permit life and health insurance companies to make long-term investments in infrastructure to help them obtain predictable returns. These new investment powers would also be granted to fraternal benefit societies and insurance holding companies. Through our consultations, we heard that life and health insurers are seeking greater flexibility to invest in infrastructure assets that would support their asset liability matching needs. Life and health insurers are attracted to infrastructure as an investment class because it generally gives long-term and stable, predictable returns. These characteristics make infrastructure a suitable type of investment for insurers to match against the liabilities they take on. As part of a general restriction on commercial investment under the Insurance Company Act, the current legislation does not permit life and health insurers to make such investment. By enabling insurers to invest in infrastructure assets, the proposed amendments will support the industry asset liability matching needs, which will make insurers more financially resilient. The proposed amendments will also have the added benefit of unlocking a new source of infrastructure financing that can support Canadian communities. My colleague, Mr. Brazo, will speak to the proposed amendments in the area of financial technology and bank terms.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Part 6, Division 16 of the Budget Implementation Act amends a number of acts governing federal financial institutions in order to adapt the legislative framework in response to the emergence of financial technology, or FinTech. FinTech refers to both the innovative delivery of financial services through technology and a technology-focused firm that offers financial services or related products. The further development of FinTech can make the financial sector more efficient and useful for Canadians, as it has with such previous innovations as online banking and email money transfers. Dans le cadre de nos consultations, les intervenants soulignent.
During our consultation, stakeholders told us that with regard to products and services, relationships with client put pressure on their business models.
Sector, from financial institutions such as banks and insurers to small and large fintechs, emphasized that adapting the federal framework was a core priority for their businesses and the financial services industry in Canada. The statutes covering financial institutions are one of the more direct levers the federal government has to foster innovation through setting a regulatory framework that is technology neutral and less prescriptive in its approach. En ce moment, le cadre régissant le secteur financier.
Currently, the framework limits investments made by financial institutions under the authority of the government. They can provide. Currently, they cannot have a mixed model of services. For example, if you have a company called Square.
Provider. While Square is clearly focused on the delivery of financial services, it is also harnessing its technology to deliver food delivery services, as well as real-time GPS tracking. Under the current legislation, a bank would not be permitted to invest in Square, owing to the fact that Square's business model includes both financial services and business lines that are not financial in nature. The proposed amendments would extend the scope of activities related to financial services in which federal financial institutions may engage in to be consistent with an evolving market environment. This includes the ability of federal financial institutions to undertake, invest in, and refer to financial technology services. The proposed amendments would also provide the ability of federally regulated financial institutions to offer identification, authentication, and verification services. While the proposed amendments provide greater flexibility for innovation, I'd like to remind the committee that this flexibility is bounded in the context of a world-leading regulatory system known for its prudence and balanced approach. Federal financial institutions are required to meet a comprehensive set of legislative and regulatory requirements and are subject to ongoing monitoring by federal financial sector agencies, such as the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions and the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. I would also like to highlight what the proposed legislation does not do. It does not change the government's long-standing policy framework wherein banks are limited in undertaking the business of insurance. While these amendments may have added, expanded, or clarified certain powers of banks, they do not override the existing blanket prohibition in the Bank Act, which prevents banks from undertaking the business of insurance unless explicitly permitted. The insurance business regulations also explicitly prohibit a bank from indirectly providing an insurance company, agent, or broker with any information respecting a customer of the bank in Canada. This prohibition on banks indirectly providing information would prevent banks from using their relationship with a third-party fintech to provide information to insurers. Secondly, I'd like to underline that this legislation must also be read in the context of Canada's existing federal and provincial privacy frameworks. Federally regulated financial institutions are and remain subject to the Personal Information Protection and Electronics Document Act, PIPEDA, which sets out rules for all private sector organizations regarding the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information, including the requirement to obtain consumer consent. The proposed amendments before the committee have been developed against this overall policy framework that has served Canadians well with well-trusted financial institutions and strong regulators. I'd now like to briefly outline the proposed amendments in the area of bank terminology. Part 6, Division 16 of the Budget Implementation Act amends the Bank Act in order to provide prudentially regulated financial institutions, such as credit unions, with the ability to use the terms bank, banker, and banking, subject to disclosure requirements. As you may know, the Bank Act currently limits the use of the words bank, banker, and banking to banks only. These terminology rules exist so that consumers know when they are dealing with a bank and when they are not. These rules also exist so that consumers understand which jurisdiction is responsible for the regulation of a given institution, including any applicable deposit insurance protections. The distinction is especially important in times of financial distress. Through our consultations, we heard that the credit union industry is seeking greater flexibility to use the terms bank, banker, and banking. Such flexibility would help them better compete with banks to offer financial services to Canadians. The government recognizes that the credit union system is an important part of the Canadian economy and contributes to competition in financial services. As such, the proposed amendments would allow credit unions and other prudentially regulated deposit-taking institutions, such as trust and loan companies, with the flexibility to use the terms bank, banker, and banking to describe their services. The proposed flexibility would be subject to certain disclosures regarding institutional identity and the applicable deposit insurance regime. As an example, provided that the required disclosures were made, a credit union would be permitted to refer to online banking services on its website or invite prospective clients to bank with them in their advertising materials. Consistent with the current rules and international best practices, only banks would be able to use bank terminology in names and identifying marks. Other non-bank financial institutions, such as fintechs and payday loan companies, would continue to be restricted from using bank terms in all circumstances. The government is also proposing amendments to the Bank Act and the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions Act that would provide the Superintendent of Financial Institutions with better calibrated and more flexible tools to enforce the rules around bank terminology. Lastly, technical amendments are also proposed that would clarify certain provisions relating to the use of bank terms. Thank you.
Enfin, pour terminer brièvement.
To wrap up briefly, the last changes in this division concern sunset provisions. We propose that these sunset provisions regarding federal institutions be lengthened by 5 years as of the Budget Implementation Act's royal assent. This would ensure that the legal framework is reviewed regularly and remains robust. The suggested changes apply to banks, trusts, and other institutions. Thank you for your interest. We'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much for the overview. I just have one question. On the sunset provisions, will that in any way impact the Bank Act review? Review of the Bank Act.
This is, I mean, this is the conclusion of the first part of the review of the Bank Act. So we're renewing the sunset date for 5 years from the coming into force of the legislation. So for another 5 years. So that will allow us to do, will allow the government, the department to do another review. There is, so that's what we're proposing.
So when would that review of the Bank Act take place?
So it depends on when the legislation comes into force, when it receives royal sanction, and then it would be 5 years after that. So
it really, in effect, delays the Bank Act review from where it is?
This is, so the amendments that we're proposing now are part of the 2019 Bank Act review. So this is the priority amendments arising from that review. They focuses on fintech infrastructure and on bank name use.
Okay, anybody got any questions? Mr. Sabara, Mr. Dussault first, then Mr. Sabara, and then Mr. Alves.
Oui, sur la question des technologies.
About fintech, we heard criticisms, and you talked about it. You may have anticipated our questions about separation between banks and insurance companies. I'd like to know, when you say that it's impossible for a bank to communicate a customer's information to, for example, a fintech company which would offer insurance based on the information received by through the bank. You said that this would be forbidden, right? Yes. Even though in the Act we talk about collecting and transmitting information as well as technologies and so on. And if so, where is the prohibition found in the Act? Is this part of the Act? Was this part of the Act modified to take into account these amendments? Amendments to Part 8 of the Bank Act is subject to Section 416, which prohibits banks from working in the insurance business, and this applies to all sections in Part 8. So everything that's included in the bill still are subject to Section 416. So I think it might be reassuring for people who might be watching. Otherwise, on the issue of banking terminology, communication requirements right now say that even though the terms bank or banker or banking are being used, the institution might not be a bank. From what I read, all these rules are going to be defined in the regulations. Is that right? Yes, that is the case. What's inside the bill is what needs to be said, the insurance system and the status. So if it's a bank or a credit union, for example. But as for the how and where, this is all going to be inside the regulations and subject to discussions with the industry. Yes, because the industry said that they wanted to develop a voluntary code. So I don't know how this can be integrated, or I don't know how the regulations are going to reflect what has been decided by the industry as being something that is acceptable to communicate the real nature of a business.
These discussions would be held with the industry to see what exactly they would have in their codes, and to find out if we can be reassured by this voluntary code of conduct. Would the necessary protection be provided? Okay, and this is something that will come into effect as soon as the royal assent is received for this bill? So it would be immediately? Yes.
Mr. Sabero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The legislation in the BI with regards to life insurance companies making investments in infrastructure, does there need to be any corresponding capital adjustments in terms of how capital is accounted for by OSFI for the insurance companies? It's one thing to have it in the BI here, but in terms of the capital ratios and capital requirements that the insurance companies operate on, I'm just curious, and I'm still thinking that they'll need some sort of adjustments in how they have to set aside capital to invest in these assets.
So there's no proposal in the legislation to make adjustment to capital rules. OSFI sets rules, capital rules independently. Of course, as you learn by experience, and we very much see this as a journey on a new type of investments. You know, there'll be lessons to be learned and adjustments to be made probably.
So with this legislation, let's hypothetically, if it's implemented this evening. Tomorrow morning, the insurance companies in Canada, which manage literally hundreds of billions of dollars and could use definitely the ability to invest in assets in Canada, what would change for them?
So at this point, life insurers are not allowed to take investments in infrastructure on the equity side. So this will open up a new area for investment for them in terms of better asset liability matching. So that's what's going to change for them. It's a new asset type of investment that they'll be allowed to make.
Of course, and historically they have been able to do debt investments up to a certain amount, and depending on the internal rating and how it's private and public and so forth. With regards to, and I think Mr. Dussault may have alluded to that if I was listening correctly, in terms of the structure between banks and insurance companies right now, there is no change in terms of banks directly, or as we would say in the House of Commons, indirectly, being able to offer any clients, business or persons, insurance products, correct? And if they were to take investments in fintech companies, that's still correct?
That would still be covered by the direct or indirect prohibition.
Okay. I probably have a bunch of other stuff, but I'll stop there. It's been a long day.
Mr. Albus.
Yeah, thank you. Just
for you,
going
Raj.
going back to life insurance companies, the provisions under subdivision B. Are there still restrictions on the ability of life insurance companies to hold infrastructure for 14 years? Or does that only pertain to the debt, not the equity provisions?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think you may be making reference to the specialized financing regulations that include a 13-year term limit on investments. We've heard from stakeholders from time to time that the term limits in those regulations can be a constraint. I mean, they are by definition. The investments, as proposed in this legislation, the investments wouldn't be made pursuant to the specialized financing regulations. Rather, they'd be held pursuant to a new set of regulations that, if adopted, it would be our intention to work collaboratively with the industry to develop. And those, as contemplated, would not include a term limit, such that long-lived infrastructure assets could be held for their life.
Okay, so subject to some sort of governing in council process where there could be a time limit. However, you still haven't gotten to that point with consultations of what's appropriate. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, what we've heard very clearly from the industry is that it's in this investment space, it's not appropriate to impose a term limit. We wholeheartedly agree that those regulations were not designed for this type of an asset, so that we're not contemplating a term limit.
The use of the term permitted infrastructure entity, that sounds similar to some of what's gone on in the European Union when they've made special provision for infrastructure to be held by certain companies. Is that following the model that was used in the EU?
So we're aware of the project that EIOPA, the European Insurance Regulator, undertook from a prudential standpoint to find ways to relieve their insurers of capital requirements. I mean, that was more of a prudential project, but it's certainly something that we're aware of, that we did research into, and that we engaged with the Europeans in the context of this project. So,
okay,
not a direct parallel. But
yeah, not a direct parallel, but again, just a useful mechanism to kind of forward the, this particular.
It's a significant project that's happening in the same sort of policy space, so we would have been aware of that.
Okay, so all the special regulations that I spoke of before, that is for the debt side. This is now the rules that will be proposed. They've yet to be proposed for the equity side. Is it correct?
That's right. For infrastructure specifically,
okay,
there are
now,
existing regulations for real property.
I believe it's a 6% holdback or capitalization that needs to happen for debt. Is that the same? Is that going to be also for the equity side? I believe it's what you said to Mr. Sabura. But
if we're dealing with the sort of prudential regulatory capital side of the house, the rules at this legislative amendment wouldn't contemplate changes to the life insurance capital adequacy test, or LICAT, that life insurers are subject to. So as Mr. Dussault mentioned, that's sort of OSFI's purview to manage independently. That said, we work with them regularly, so no changes being contemplated to the amount of regulatory capital that a life and health insurer would have to hold against a given investment.
Yeah. Okay, again, I think what the industry would argue is that pension plans from or within Canada or sovereign funds from outside of Canada don't need to hold that kind of capital back, and can obviously bid higher for some of these assets. But anyway, that being said, different argument for a different day because it's not part of the BIA. Appreciate your answers on this. I'd like just to quickly go back to the fintech side, and in it, there's some talk and I'm just basing this off of our analyst's report here. It said, respectively, to permit financial institutions to act subject to the terms, conditions, and restrictions set out in regulation as an agent for any person involved in the provision of financial services. So really what they're saying is that if I have a depositor, I'm going to act as an agent to help them receive financial, whether it be app-based service, etc., so that we're just authorizing the bank to be able to digitize the information on behalf of their depositors. That's what's kind of contemplated here.
I would say that these are existing provisions already in the Bank Act that allow for financial institutions to act as an agent with respect to financial services. So these amendments clarify and modernize the fact that this agency relationship can happen without a financial institution having had to take a direct investment in a company. Currently, the legislation, the feedback we receive from stakeholders is that it's not clear whether a financial institution would actually have to hold an investment in this company in order to act as an agent on their behalf. And we have clarified that it would not have to hold an investment in that.
Okay, so are there any rules, because there is some, for example, Clause 322 adds Section 522.081 to the Bank Act to allow the Governor and Council to make regulations indicating when a foreign bank or entity associated with a foreign bank can acquire or hold control of or acquire or hold a substantial investment in a Canadian entity that engages in financial services activities. So is this any way to circumvent the Canada Investment Act, where there are certain provisions that relate to foreign entities purchasing Canadian companies?
No. The FinTech-related amendments, again, apply to the existing framework, so they don't set aside any of the existing other legislation. What they do is establish for foreign banks operating in Canada the same type of flexibility that we're offering other financial institutions operating in the domestic space.
And so they would still be subject to all Canadian privacy laws and PIPEDA, et cetera?
Correct.
Okay, no, that's just helpful to know. Lastly, just wanted to go to the banking terminology. In regards to, and this is something I know this puts some people off, or at least it did with the Minister of Finance, but it is realistically, because Section 983 of the Bank Act restricts entities that are not banks from using the word bank, banker, or banking. I just wanted to say, so when we have food banks or blood banks, I know clearly that for most of us, we would say that consumers are most likely you can have the common sense to not relate to them. But technically, if OSFI interpreted that someone was using it, then, or is this specifically in the Bank Act where it's only related to those in the financial institution space?
That's precisely
okay.
It
Like I said, I just want to make sure we're not capturing legitimate activity in a way that doesn't make sense to Canadians. So I appreciate the common sense of hearing that. Now, when it relates to ATB, yes, thank you. Relates to ATB and some trust companies, again, this, because I'm not as familiar with the trust companies that do take deposits, so I assume there has been a proper consultation with them. I know ATP is very supportive of this legislation. Okay, no, just wanted to make sure that's that, and I think that's it, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Polyev.
So we are getting correspondence from constituents suggesting that provisions in the budget bill would give banks the ability to share private information with insurance companies. How do you address that concern?
And we've certainly heard those calls as well, and I think some context on this sort of section would be useful. So the existing provisions in terms of information technology activities date back to 2001. The proposed amendments don't seek to change those existing provisions. What they're looking to do is make the provisions more technology neutral. The provisions continue to be subject to federal and provincial privacy legislation, including PIPEDA, and which would require that consumers consent to the sharing of any information that a bank would want to share. So those privacy acts and regulations continue to apply in the context of these new provisions as well.
Okay, and back to the issue of insurance companies investing in infrastructure. How do financial regulations ensure that insurance companies have liquidity to pay out unexpectedly high claims if a large part of their float is invested in hard, non-liquid assets like toll roads and other infrastructure?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I would say that that's first and foremost the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions' role. I mean, their mandate is to protect not just depositors and creditors, but policyholders on the insurance side as well. And one of the key ways in which they do that is by ensuring that federally regulated life and health insurers hold enough regulatory capital against the investments that they make, and that the amount of capital held is commensurate with the risk profile of the given investment, the credit risk, the regulatory risk, the operational risk, such that there would be an adequate amount of capital available to that institution to weather an unexpected event. That being said, I don't work for the superintendent's office. I'm sure they could give you a far more detailed account of how they go about that. But that is first and foremost the safety net that exists to ensure that policyholders can be confident that their life and health insurance companies are investing soundly.
With that, one final question, Mr. Dussault.
Just back on fintech, ma question serait de savoir si ça.
What I'd like to know, following up on Mr. Poilievre's question about PIPEDA, would PIPEDA apply if data is transferred from one company to another? Client information. If the fintech is the owner of the bank, will privacy rules still apply if you're talking about the same entity? If I'm doing business with a company and it is allowed to share information within that single entity, in that case, the fintech insurance companies and the banks would not have this barrier.
On insurance, the insurance business regulations continue to apply, and they provide that a bank shall not provide directly or indirectly an insurance company, agent, or broker with any information respecting a customer of the bank in Canada. And these restrictions would apply for the investments or partnerships a bank may undertake with third parties such as fintechs. So the indirect provision will continue to apply. And with respect to the question on PIPEDA, the existing framework respecting the transfer or sharing or collection or dissemination of client information would always be subject to consent, subject to the existing privacy frameworks.
So a bank cannot own an insurance company, a fintech, and it would be called partnership with a fintech?
If it's a partnership with a fintech, it could not indirectly provide customer-related information that would be used for insurance purposes.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll thank the 5 witnesses for their presentation. Now to committee. Other than Division 19, I don't see a lot of controversy in the next 4. So are you still willing to push ahead and try and finish this? Okay. That's fine with me. Division 17, Western Economic Diversification Act. The witnesses is Mr. David Doerr, Director, Strategic Policy and Government Affairs. Mr. Greywall.
I think we all have access to the preambles, so I think we should make it optional if they want to say it or not.
Yeah, we have access to them. If you could be very brief in your preambles. Go ahead, Mr. Doerr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a short opening statement. The Department of Western Economic Diversification is a regional development agency in the Innovation, Science and Economic Development portfolio. Our mandate is to promote the development and diversification of the economy of Western Canada, the 4 Western provinces. We are seeking a minor amendment to our enabling legislation, the Western Economic Diversification Act. Currently, in order to sign an agreement with a province, the Act requires that our minister first seek the approval of the Governor and Council, essentially Cabinet and the Governor-General. This requirement can add months to the process, which can delay the implementation of federal initiatives as well as provincial initiatives. We're seeking to amend the Western Economic Diversification Act to eliminate this requirement This change would allow Western Economic Diversification to respond more quickly to opportunities to collaborate with provinces in areas of shared responsibility.
Thank you. And just on the preamble, Raj, I know we have access to it, but I do know people go and read some of these minutes to find out what's happening, and the preamble informs them. That's part of the reason for it. We do have it, but there is people do that, surprisingly. Any questions to Mr. Doerr? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Doerr. Division 18, which is the Parliament of Canada Act. From the Privy Council Office, Selena Beatty, Director of Operations Cabinet Affairs, and Madame Burgess, Legal Counsel. Floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll be brief, given that you have the preamble, but some folks may still be looking for a bit more information. So, members, thank you, Mr. Chair, members. As you are aware, members of Parliament do not currently have access to maternity or parental leave. You do not contribute to employment insurance, and therefore you don't have access to benefits under the Employment Insurance Act. As part of its study of ways to make Parliament a more family-friendly environment, the House of Commons Procedure and House Affairs recommended amending the Parliament of Canada Act to make maternity and parental leave possible for members of Parliament. So the amendment that the government is proposing as part of the Budget Implementation Act would allow for the House and the Senate to make regulations that would enable maternity and parental leave type provisions for parliamentarians. Ça me ferait plaisir de répondre à vos questions.
I'll be delighted to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Elvis.
Thank you. Actually, one of my daughters was born when I was in the last Parliament, so I'm just interested to see how this mechanism would work. If you could maybe explain exactly how that would work for a female or I guess male member, so that they could utilize said benefit compared to EI, for example.
Okay. So members don't receive a salary, you receive an allowance, and the Parliament of Canada Act currently provides that for every sitting day a member does not attend the House, the income is cut by $120 a day. There are 3 exceptions that are listed in Section 57 of the Parliament of Canada Act, and those reasons are if the House or Senate was not sitting, so if you didn't actually miss a sitting, you're not cut for missing a sitting, if you're on public or official business, or by reason of illness, and pregnancy or parental reasons wouldn't fall into any of those categories. What the Procedure Committee recommended would be to add maternity or parental leave as a 4th category under that. The government has chosen to achieve the same end in a slightly different way, because if it was simply added as a 4th category, that would be a blanket that would apply with no restrictions and no parameters until such time as the House or the Senate chose to apply parameters. The approach that the government is recommending to Parliament in the Budget Implementation Act instead would create a new power for the House and the Senate to create regulations for its own members. So in fact, the details of how this would operate will be up to members to decide, and the House would then have the ability to adopt an order setting out those regulations. So the details of how this would actually operate will be up to members themselves and the House to decide by way of an order, which it would have the power to do if this amendment is adopted. There would then be a subsequent stage whereby members would determine what those parameters would be. So would there be a limitation to the number of days? Would it be something less than the full income that would be for a specific number of days? Any number of parameters would be up to the House to determine for members of the House. And so when the House adopts an order, that would have the power of regulations, which would then regulate how this would apply to members. So the specifics of the actual scheme will be for you to decide for members of the House.
Now, would this motion be like a committee of the whole where all members could speak to it, or would it go to the PROC for examination before it was ratified by the House, or just what would the process for that be? Because I want...
So the House and the Senate both have the power to adopt, an order for the regulations, and the House could adopt an order by any number of mechanisms, but normally it would be a motion that would be moved. That could potentially be a motion for concurrence in a committee report. It could be another type of motion. Again, those are subject to the rules of the House and would be for members of the House to decide.
Okay, I appreciate that there's a process perhaps where the PROC committee could actually dive into this, because again, we'd want to make sure that it works for parliamentarians, and I would imagine the PROC would appreciate being consulted before something was done. Thank you.
Mr. Dezeau.
Merci. Je me demandais...
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Excuse me, I have the interpreter in my ear, and I just want to adjust the volume. Thank you for being here. With the current rules, I'm just being curious perhaps, but you seem to be saying that it's not the case. Can women not already have a doctor's note after giving birth to be able to be on sick leave? In some cases, you can't come back to work immediately. Is there some flexibility currently with regard to this allocation so that they aren't docked $120 a day? Given that maternity leave isn't one of the three reasons, could that already cover part of the mat leave? I realize you could not necessarily have a doctor's note for a full year, but could a doctor's note cover part of that time? I don't want to make any presumptions about current practices and medical leave in the House of Commons. With regard to maternity leave, however, you're not necessarily sick. A woman isn't necessarily sick. What is planned is that the House of Chambers would have the possibility to adopt rules around pregnancies and for the second parent, that is not the pregnant woman, who could also have parental leave, for example, to take care of a newborn or a young child. Sick leave may apply during a pregnancy, but that's not always the case, and you can't say that pregnancy is necessarily a sickness. If during a pregnancy a woman faces circumstances that would require leave other than sick leave, the two parts of the law could then apply, and the House of Commons would decide how to implement these two sections of the law. Good. Thanks for the answer. I was just curious. I'm not up to date on all the rules. But of course, you're right, pregnancy isn't an illness. So thank you for pointing that out. Well, what I was trying to say was that I understand that this question could be delicate. However, in the current circumstances, perhaps there is already a way to give maternity leave.
Okay, with that, it is in the bill in any event, and further decisions have to be made. Thank you, Ms. Burgess. Thank you, Ms. Beattie. Division 19, Canada Pension Plan. Mr. Countryman with Finance, you've been here before, and we have with you with ESDC, Ms. And I can't pronounce that. Ehu?
Ehu.
Ehu. Oh, no, you're talking CRA. I know how to pronounce that one, surprisingly, I do. Ms. Haru. Giordano? Miss Giordano with ESDC. Please, welcome, folks. Who's leading off?
I will.
Okay, Mariana.
So, thank you very much. I will make this brief, as I know you've all had a hard day. Ce projet de loi propose des modifications au régime.
This bill proposes amendments to the pension fund following the agreement in principle made by the finance minister in December 2017. These changes eliminate age-based restrictions on survivors' pension and fix the amount of the death benefit at $2,500. That would mainly be an advantage for middle and low-income families. There would also be a benefit to disabled retirement pension beneficiaries under the age of 65. There would also be protection of retirement and survivors' pension amounts under the CPP enhancement for individuals who are disabled and for parents with lower earnings during child rearing years. This bill also maintains portability between the CPP and the enhanced Quebec pension plan following the amendments of the latter, as well as authorizing the making of regulations also agreed to by ministers in December 2017.
Will be especially beneficial to women, as they are more likely to reduce work, to care for young children, become widowed at a young age, or collect a disability pension. In addition, integrating the Canada Pension Plan and the Quebec Pension Plan enhancement ensures the full portability of the enhanced benefits across Canada for all workers. As well, Canadians can rest assured that the fully funded enhanced CPP will remain well-funded over time, providing them with benefits that they can count on. Je suis prête à répondre à vos questions. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dano. Any questions on the Canada Pension Plan provisions? Mr. Dussault.
Oui, merci d'être là ce soir.
Thank you for being here tonight. My question concerns the benefits and the drop-in and drop-out concept. The government decided to use income, taking into work income into account. Have you taken into account the difference between the system that excludes earnings, the current system that is, and the system proposed that takes earnings into account? Have you calculated the difference in terms of benefits? It depends on each beneficiary's earnings. If a person has a young child, he or she will probably.
However, individuals, we know that the trend is that people have children later in life. For these individuals, it may be more beneficial, as we're taking the 5-year average prior to their taking time off to take care of children. So it really depends on your pattern of earnings.
Mais vous avez des données qui peuvent démontrer que ça.
Do you have data that show that it can dramatically affect younger parents? Normally, in the workplace, you've earned a lot less if you have a child at the age of 18 than if you have a child at the age of 35. Usually young parents have lower earnings, or a lower income rather. But you sometimes see women postponing pregnancies and having children later in life. It depends on each individual's specific earnings then. I'm just trying to figure out if it's a system that improves the game or is worse. I can't say if it's better or worse. I can say that the enhancement is structured in a completely different way from the base. The drop-in is much better suited to this situation. When we're talking about enhancing, we're talking about cumulative data. The best 40 years to calculate the pension. However, if you use the basic, you're talking about an average. In the enhancement, however, this is not allowed. You also always accumulate the earnings. People would be credited then for these earnings. This is a principle used in many countries, Belgium, I can't find the word in French, Sweden, Japan, all use a similar principle. The dropout approach is the exception. And has it passed the test of GBA Plus, the GBA Plus test? Most enhancements in this bill will benefit women more than men, I must admit, because women are the ones who leave the workplace to take care of young children. Women are more likely to have a disability. Women become widows at a younger age. For this reason, women will be better off. You seem to be saying that women who have children at a younger age will be penalized. It depends on their earnings. However, there are minimums for people who do not have enough earnings.
Did any of you want to add anything else? Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for your endurance hanging around with us for 3 hours this evening and this afternoon, whenever it was previously. Thank you very much. Last division, Division 20, Criminal Code, Ms. Shepherd, Justice Canada.
Oh, this one.
Yep. So, Madam Shepherd, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Division 20 of Part 6 would create a remediation agreement regime in a new part of the Criminal Code. It would be Part 22.1. What is a remediation agreement? A remediation agreement is a made-in-Canada version of what other countries call a deferred prosecution agreement, which is essentially an agreement between a prosecutor and an accused whereby charges are stayed pending successful completion of the terms of an agreement that the parties make between them. Remediation agreements would be a new tool for prosecutors in Canada to use at their discretion in appropriate circumstances where it's in the public interest to do so, and they would be available for use in addressing corporate criminal wrongdoing. So serious economic crimes that are listed in a schedule that a corporation or an organization has been alleged to have committed. There are essentially the regime in the Criminal Code sets out, it has a purpose clause which outlines the importance of making sure that the agreement constitutes an effective, proportionate, and dissuasive penalty. Another purpose is to provide for reparation for harms done to victims, and they are intended to reduce the negative consequences to uninvolved third parties. So what the regime does is it sets out factors that the prosecutors are to consider in determining whether the remediation agreement would be appropriate, such as the gravity of the offense, the degree of involvement of senior management in the corporation, whether the company is willing to identify implicated individuals, that sort of thing. There is an invitation to negotiate that the prosecutor issues to a company, and the part of the code sets out what that would contain. It would explain that the negotiations must be carried out in good faith. There would be a time limit for accepting the terms. There's a lot of other procedural detail set out in the draft bill. There are mandatory contents of a remediation agreement, so they must all have an agreed statement of facts. The company must admit responsibility for the act or omission that would constitute the offense. They have to cooperate. They have to forfeit any property that they've obtained through the commission of the wrongdoing, and they have to pay a penalty. They have to make reparations or explain why that's not viable in the circumstances if the victim cannot be identified, for example. And they have to pay a victim surcharge. So, and those are just some of them. Then there are also optional conditions that may be included, and that can be anything, but the code would set out 3, which is an obligation to enhance the compliance measures that the company has in place, such as training of employees. Another is to appoint an independent corporate compliance monitor to monitor the company's compliance with the terms of the agreement, in particular the enhanced compliance measures, but it could be other. Then there are 4 court processes. One is to approve the agreement. So once the company and the prosecutor have negotiated what they consider to be a fair agreement, they go to court. The court will approve it if they are satisfied that the organization has been charged with an offense, that the terms are fair and proportionate and reasonable and in the interest of justice. And they will specifically advert to the victim reparation term. Then during the course of the agreement, which could last, it's negotiated between the parties, but it could last in other jurisdictions 3 to 5 years typically, the prosecutor may go back to court to vary the terms, typically to extend it, to give the company more time to comply. They could go back and terminate it if there's non-compliance and it looks like there's no possibility of compliance. And at the end of the process, the prosecutor will go back to the court and seek a declaration of successful completion, so the company can say, we've been cleansed, there are no proceedings hanging over our heads. For transparency reasons, there is a requirement to publish all the orders as well as the agreement itself, and it's for other companies to see the kinds of terms that might be negotiated if they were in a similar situation. There's authority to enact regulations or to promulgate regulations rather to deal with compliance monitoring because it's new in the Canadian criminal system. But there's enough detail that it could operate without the regulations. And then the offenses to which it would apply are set out in a schedule. There's 31 of them right now, but there's a power of the Governing Council to add or to take away offenses. And then the coming into force would be 90 days after royal assent. So that's in a nutshell what it does, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Mr. Fergus on the list, and then Mr. Albus.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shepherd, for drawing the short stick and short straw and being here with us to the very late. But actually, I do have some serious questions about this. This is a part of I have to admit, I did not read this provision before coming here tonight. I got through most of this, but not all of it. But it strikes me that where it strikes me wrong, and perhaps you can help me out, is that this remediation agreement provisions seem to be focused really on white-collar crime, whereby it's limited to white-collar crime. And I was just going through section 404, 405. I'm just a little. Please do correct me if I'm wrong. If there are other provisions in the criminal code that allow for similar kinds of remediation agreements for non-economic crimes
First of all, this came from a consultation on economic crime, so it's the result of that, which it was a government-wide consultation that was carried out throughout the fall. Part of it, it is unique because there's no provision to there are diversion schemes in the criminal code for individuals, but there's no possibility of imposing a fine, and so that's part of the reason that this is a statutory scheme. It's also aimed at one of the goals in other countries' regimes that this would hope to emulate is that it would encourage companies to come forward and admit to wrongdoing to enhance detection, but there's a requirement that individuals would be, that the company would make reasonable efforts to identify implicated individuals so that they could be prosecuted. So that's how it works.
So again, it does then, it does leave an uncomfortable taste in my mouth in the sense that it seems that we were going to let people who would commit a very serious economic crime, which has very serious effects against those who are not capable of negotiating these agreements in other crimes that they might be victims of or perpetrators of. And we seem to be letting off people in white-collar crimes with a little slap on the wrist, when in fact, if we're going to do this kind of remediation, it seems that we would want to extend this to other forms of crimes where it would be better off not putting people in jail or having them face stiffer mandatory penalties. It's just something that just strikes me as being a little off here. I do understand the purpose of trying to negotiate with companies, to encourage them to come forward, to admit, to not litigate, so that we can make some reparations. But again, it seems that we're letting those with the means have an easier time of it than those who don't have the means.
Well, it is true that some of the features such as compliance monitoring would not lend themselves to smaller value crimes. That's for sure. So it would be more likely used for larger scale offenses. And
so in a sense, if I steal $10, I'm in trouble. But if I steal $10 million, I can work this out.
Well, if you were
rude. Sorry. To be crude, not rude, crude.
This regime is applicable only to organizations which, of course, can't go to jail anyway. It's not available to natural persons, only to legal persons. So individuals would not be able to avail themselves of this regime. But as far as the types of offenses go, it is possible to expand it in the future. What we heard from participants in the consultation was to keep it focused at the outset, because certain features of it, like the compliance monitoring, are fairly new in Canadian law. So it would be that it was desirable to keep it focused so that we could see how it worked in practice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your presence here tonight, Ms. Shepherd. What section of the budget speech, or the budget book, I should say, was this particular proposal?
I don't know the exact section, but it was a commitment made in the budget speech.
Was there a direct reference?
There was a direct reference to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, just in regards to this, first of all, I think that regardless of whether or not it was in the budget document, this is not a good provision to have as part of an omnibus piece of legislation, especially to have the last section. That is no criticism on you, ma'am. I'm just simply pointing out a few things to the record here, because this is quite a change of approach. And the fact that the Governor and Council can add to a schedule and add other crimes or delete, we are giving a tremendous amount of discretion. And considering that this should be a separate bill or part of one of the other omnibus bills, I think it's C-75, where at least the Justice Committee could take a look at this and hear directly, to see if this is the right approach. I have deep concerns. In fact, even the fact that you can have the bribery of a foreign official To me, that is absolutely, that is not just an average everyday white-collar crime. That is something where someone who's politically connected or at a very high business level can do. And I share many of Mr. Fergus's concerns that some people will view this as being where if you are connected, you have a way to remediate your way out of jail. And so I have some deep concerns here, and I would really hope that we could talk about separating this out, or at least having the Justice Committee to review this, because this is a fundamental departure the way we handle the criminal code. And I'm all for new thinking, but to have this as the last division in an omnibus bill, and believe me, I have no issue with having justices' remuneration as part of a budget bill. You need to put it somewhere. And to have a standalone bill for such a small section on something that's so routine, I get that. But this is not an appropriate use in my understanding. This does not help the economy. In fact, it may encourage some people to push the envelope. So, Mr. Chair, I don't know what to say other than that we should probably consider hiving this off and sending it to the Justice Committee. Not sure if that's going to do me any good, though.
Thank you, Dan. Mr. Dussault wanted in. Go ahead.
Oui, merci. Je répéterai pas.
Thank you. I won't repeat what my colleague just said, but indeed I had the same reaction when I saw this division. I wondered what the Finance Committee, or how the Finance Committee would be able to proceed to ensure that this division has the necessary attention if you take the proposed changes into account. I'd like to ask a question. What is the reason behind this amendment? Was there a particular case that motivated you to go ahead with this change in the way of dealing with such situations? Let's say you have a railway company that is responsible for derailing in a city and destroys the downtown area. Could this law apply in this amendment apply in this case?
Exclusion for situations where there's been serious bodily harm or death, so it cannot apply in those situations. In answer to your first question, it was not motivated by any particular case, but it came, it's something that is being considered in other countries or has been in place in other countries. It's been in the U.S. since the 1930s, but they've started using it more since the Enron case where a lot of employees lost their jobs. The UK has enacted it. Australia has legislation going through the House right now. So it's something that businesses have said, you know, we should be looking at this. In Canada, it was part of an economic crime consultation that there were two discussion streams to it. One was on the regime for procurement debarment. So it went forth as an economic crime consultation in that context. So.
I guess, Ms. Shepherd, what I'm hearing to a certain extent here, to a great deal of extent, is that the nobody is arguing against the concept, but there is a huge question whether this should be in a budget bill, and even I will say that. Who else did you want in, Mr. Pierre?
Yes. So I just want to make sure I understand the provision. So Division 20, Part 6 would allow those who are suspected of the crimes of stolen property, fraud, insider trading, and bribery of a foreign public official to avoid prosecution by signing on to a deferred prosecution agreement obeyance of which would allow them to avoid charges altogether and prevent prosecution from pursuing them on the same offense. Do I have that right?
Almost, but they would have to be charged for the agreement. They'd have to have been charged. The prosecutor could invite them to. That's why we call them accused. We refer to accused at the outset. The prosecutor would have to be convinced that the prosecution threshold had been met. There was a prospect of conviction. The evidence was there, and so they could invite them to negotiate the terms, but the agreement itself could not be approved until the court was satisfied that they had been charged. So sometime between when they could be charged years ago or right up until the last minute, but they have been charged before the agreement could be approved by the court and take effect.
So what would you say is the precise difference between this and a guilty plea?
Well, the guilty plea would result in a conviction.
Right. Whereas this would mean that they would have no conviction. Would there be any penalty?
Well, the penalty would be the terms of the agreement, and as I mentioned, there are mandatory terms. So they have to pay a fine, a financial penalty. They have to forfeit any profits that they have obtained, disgorge any benefits that they have as a result of their conduct. They would have to make reparations to victims or explain why they can't do that. They would have to pay a victim surcharge. So the terms, and especially if compliance monitoring is involved, they would have to pay for that, which can be very significant financially. They would have to make a sincere effort to comply. And if it looks like that's not, first of all, it's up to the prosecutor in their absolute discretion to determine whether to offer to negotiate. And they have to be convinced that it's in the public interest, and the court has to be convinced it's in the public interest. So, and they can also, partway through, either party can withdraw from negotiations, or the prosecutor can apply for termination if they don't believe that that the compliance and remediative effect is being achieved. They can terminate and resume the prosecution. So that there's the threat of that out there until it's finished.
And these are all offenses that are prosecuted by the Director of Public Prosecutions or the Prosecution Service of Canada?
Not necessarily. They could be prosecuted by the provincial prosecutors as well.
And so this would, because it's in the criminal code, right?
Unless the Public Prosecution Service of Canada is contract police, is operating
contract
in the
prosecution.
North. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it could be any. But the AG's consent is required as delegated, so it wouldn't necessarily, likely not be private prosecutors, but any public prosecutor.
So the AG would, by whom you mean that authority, for example, at a federal level is delegated to the DPP, and at a provincial level is delegated to the Crown Attorney's bureaus in the respective provinces. So for such agreements to occur, the public prosecutor would have to agree that this is an appropriate remedy? Or, okay, so this would not, so if someone were charged with these offenses, they would not automatically have recourse to this deferred prosecution agreement. It would only occur if lawyers from the defense and the prosecutors agreed that it was appropriate.
The prosecutor has to be convinced that it's negotiating the agreement is in the public interest and appropriate in the circumstances, and then there's a series of factors that the prosecutor has to consider in determining whether that's the case. So it's the circumstances in which the act or omission came to light. Did they disclose proactively, or did they hide their conduct? The gravity of the omission, whether it was corruption rampant throughout the senior ranks, whether the organization has taken disciplinary measures against the individuals that caused. So there's a whole bunch of factors that they would have to take into account in arriving at the determination that it's in the public interest, and they are under no obligation to offer one. It's at their discretion.
And did this come from any kind of recommendation from provincial prosecution services, or who asked for this?
It came as a result of a public consultation. It was a Government of Canada consultation, as I mentioned, that had 2 discussion streams, and it was a broad consultation. There were NGOs, accountants, business associations, prosecutors, small and medium enterprises. So there was quite a diversity of views. Individual prosecutors made submissions. So there were it attempts to respond to the feedback that was given by the vast majority, actually.
Mr. Albus, last question, I believe.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to actually ask some questions now. Just in regards to this, if a prospective province, and I would say probably the Attorney General of each province would be the one to decide whether or not they would actively use these DPAs, is that correct?
Remediation agreements.
Yeah, remediation agreements. So they would be the ones that decide to whether or not they were appropriate to be used in their jurisdiction. Is that correct?
I guess so, because it would be, if the prosecutor was, it would be up to whoever was delegated the authority to negotiate them and to determine that.
Okay, so you could have where one particular province decides that they don't feel that this is a particularly useful tool, and they just not choose to take it up and use it. Is that correct?
I suppose it's possible. I mean,
so you could have theoretically where if someone commits a certain type of fraud in one province, they would not necessarily face the same sanctions if someone else in a different province did the same kind of act, or maybe was involved in multi-jurisdictions, where you would have a level adjudication of justice because one would use a certain tool, one wouldn't.
Well, that could be the case within a province. I mean, it could be the case that it's a discretionary tool, and again, it only applies to. I mean, it applies to companies, not individuals. So it's not. There's no charter issue. That would be the argument companies make now that that they are potentially eligible for one for operations under the jurisdiction of the UK or the US, but not in Canada. So it's
Yeah, but again, this is Canada,
Yeah.
so I would expect when people are in Canada, they're going to follow Canadian laws and not have the expectation that they should get the same treatment in the United States or in Great Britain. Okay, just in regards to, Mr. Chair, this Parliament passed the Magnitsky Act specifically where we've said that we want to come down hard on those that are engaged in bribery and other types of actions abroad, and we'll punish it, and we'll see those things as here in Canada. So I just would really suggest that we are probably going to need to find an alternative forum, because this is a major leap, and I'm not sure all Canadians, not just the opposition, but I'm not sure all Canadians are ready for such a massive departure. And considering that while there may have been a consultation process, to me it sounds like it was oriented around a certain cadre of Canadian strata rather than a wide variety of people that might have very much different ideas.
Mr. Dussault, did you want in Francesco? Okay.
Juste par curiosité, la trentaine.
In Appendix 6, the 30-some offenses, I didn't notice the appendix previously. Generally, what type of sentence or penalty are associated with these offenses generally?
Is that what you're talking about, or in the schedule of offenses?
Dans l'annexe 6, toutes les infractions, on les liste.
In Schedule 6, all the offenses are named from 1A to 1Z3. Generally, what is the sentence or
fairly significant, like the foreign bribery, as was mentioned, because subject to a 10-year sanction or unlimited fines. Like they're again, the companies. This is a regime that applies to companies that have been accused, and the companies have to identify individuals for prosecution for conduct flowing out of the same offense. So really the sanctions, imprisonment can't apply to a company that's charged. They would be subject to a fine, and a fairly large one, because there's generally no upper limit.
Ouais. Je croyais que dans une certaine mesure,
I thought that boards of directors could be held responsible for fraud for any criminal act.
The company can through them, but it's the company, so the company can't be imprisoned. But you're right, obviously the actions would be committed by an individual, and the company would have an obligation to identify the individual so they could be prosecuted. So it's not a way of getting individuals off the hook at all. One of the objectives, in fact, is to try and identify conduct that more easily. By offering an incentive for the company, the idea is that they would bring forward help detect wrongdoing.
c'est un incitatif pour la compagnie de quand ils décèlent des.
It's an incentive for the company when it detects this type of behavior within its company to come to its own identification of the person and to have that person translated into justice.
That's right. They have an obligation to make best efforts to identify implicated individuals.
With that, thank you, Ms. Shepherd. And with that, we will, just for committee members' reference, we will meet tomorrow afternoon at 3:30 with quite a number of witnesses, and that should be our last session this week, we hope. Thank you very much, Ms. Shepherd. Meeting adjourned.